towards the institutions or and networks, specifically for smart partnership type of inclusion to achieve this inclusivity. And of course, Deputy Prime Minister and everybody else made the point this morning that is the basis also of national vision, where we had new insights. And now the three-pronged approach that has evolved within the smart partnership context, this vision, but this quality, financial inclusion and technology. It's supposed to be looked at not only from the point of view of visions only, or technology inclusion or leveraging only, but from all the other angles, because that's the only way networks and interactions probably will succeed. So the idea of advice, which has been touched on this morning by the way of vision, foresight, but not only, will continue within the issue of technology inclusion, which is this afternoon. And there are 2 or 3 new insights that have been, that they have been identified. They are led by, as in the morning, 3 people, smart partners. So they are Kati Cunningham, Chris Katande, and Oma, in whatever order. There are some specific new dimensions that we have the ability to bring in at the hub during think tanking, which were some of them identifying these smart reading ticks, smart reading clicks. There are many, but 1 or 2 of them we've been able to kind of tempt, like David Cleveland has a completely new and unconventional, is not new otherwise, I'll try to say something about it, view about advice, science advice, networks and government. And then followed by 1 or 2 other already new dimensions, and then a completely new dimension within this technology inclusion, which is more technology and public security or social networks, or we don't know how to call it. So for that reason, we have Carl from Demos, who will try to sort of shape, to try to tell us how it wants shape. I don't think they have an idea how to, but to shape thinking in relation to public security issues, if we call them that way. You forgive me, I'm calling it that way. Yeah? And we'll have then the insight on CD printing or CD making, or however you want to call it, at the end of it. So the reason why I said that, you can forgive me, the issue of advice is not new, is if you only take 1970s, 1980s, there was quite a seminal analysis of scientists in Whitehall. There are many others, but Phil Gummett is one of our smart partners too. And this is something which was very much looked at in the 1980s. one of the things they are writing here about is the 1980s. Our recent discussion to do with science advice relate very much to more open government. Now, the open government in 1980s was probably something of a similar nature that is being discussed nowadays, 2013. It's just in a different context. And the role of advisors on science technology or advisors' office within the institutions, again, are quite the same. Now, Omar, who had 22 years or so around the Prime Minister in Malaysia as a science advisor, could actually validate some of the things to do with networks, maybe even himself didn't quite realize some of the qualities of things, the way he'd done them within the system, which made him a most successful science advisor, currently fit for the current age. Yeah? So this is the issue. So between Chris, Kati, and Omar, you want to take forward? Maybe Kati, you want to start as a lady? Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome back after lunch. Thanks to Chris, I spent most of my evening on safari last night, looking up all the tips he'd given me about where to read intelligent things about development. And I found one in particular that I want to share with you because it is actually, it'll take us into along a slightly different route to the one we've been discussing so far, and it'll introduce one or two maybe new concepts or new concepts to the discussions that we normally have. And it's based on work which is going on in the Kennedy School of Government in Harvard. And there are two people there who've been working on using the indices of economic growth and development, using three of these, putting them together and then measuring development, measuring growth, and measuring other factors which appear to be contributing to this growth. Because at the moment, we do have a situation globally where the developed world is going ahead of the less developed. The gap is growing. And we really want to know why and what can be done about it. I won't go into their mathematics. I'm leaving that to Sarah and all the details, but I'll just try and talk about what their conclusions were and in what way they'd be useful to us. I mean, their conclusions are that growth in income reflects growth in complexity of the economy. The complexity is based on non-tradable capabilities. So I mean, these are new words for us in some ways. Non-tradable capabilities include, for example, property rights, institutional infrastructure, regulation, specific skills, and level of knowledge. And the diversity of these capabilities, the more of these capabilities you have, the more you can diversify your products. So in other words, you can broaden the base of your economy. You have more goods, different goods to trade. If you have that, you can also trade more effectively with other countries which also have diversity and a broad base. And it is, in fact, more effective for your own development to trade with those countries who are diverse. The process of diversification can sort of work through in a way which means that the economy moves. It can jump from one sort of set of capabilities and products to another. There can be an element of leapfrogging in a development process. Now, what does this mean? I've gone over it very quickly, and I'm happy later on to take questions, but what does it mean for policy for growth and development, and how does it relate to leveraging science and technology? Basically, I think there are just a few points I'd like to make based on their findings. One is, don't rely on growth through cheap labour. You won't grow very much if all you're doing is producing things for other people with your own labour, but having nothing more than those few unskilled jobs to show for it. It's something of a cul-de-sac. Grow your capabilities, especially the labour skills, the knowledge, move into the knowledge economy, which we talk about a lot, and certainly Omar has developed a whole range of expertise in that. Also, property rights. If you want people to come invest in your country, you have to safeguard their property rights. You have to safeguard your own property rights. Institutional infrastructure. That is particularly important. Move up the value chain of resources. And this is something that Chris may talk about, because it's certainly something that they are trying to do in Zimbabwe. And diversify the range of goods that you trade in. Choose who you export to. That's difficult to do. But in fact, countries are in a constant process of negotiation in trade. For example, the ETAs, the Economic Trade Agreements with the European Union. The Caribbean, African countries are seeking to reach agreement. And at the moment, maybe they're over-concentrating on some of their basic goods, rather than trying to make sure that they're going to get agreement to trade when they've got move up the value-added chain. And if I just use a very simple example, butter. I know butter is an issue for Namibia, because I've heard them say so in Brussels. And there is certainly an element of dumping of European butter going on. But if you're going up the value chain, well, it's more a question of what you're doing with your butter. What are you making with your butter? So maybe you need to think about, well, making sure that you can trade your biscuits, cakes, whatever you do with your butter, rather than just the butter. That's just a very simple example. So clearly, in all of this, there is a science and technology element, and it's important. You can't diversify, you can't go up the value chain without an input from science and technology, without leveraging with science and technology. And it's essential to complexity, essential to diversification. And I think that I'd like now to hand over to either Chris or Omar.
Thank you, Kathy. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, to carry on from what Kathy has said, let me remind you that we are talking about concurring and leveraging technology. We spent a lot of time in Darussalam this year talking about leveraging. Leveraging is actually simply saying utilizing science, technology, and innovation. But utilizing it for what? I think we have to bring it to context. And for me, it is, and I've been, I think the theme in Tanzania was the same. It was about leveraging technology to achieve socio-economic transformation. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Now let's look let's look at just the economic part of it. How do you live? How do you leverage technology to achieve economic transformation? Now, this earlier today, Henry was talking about how one looks at economic activities in one country. I would put it this way: you leverage technology in the economic sense to do 4 things. Number one, to look at your existing economic sector, which is the strong one. In my country, the strong one is oil palm and rubber. How do we in our country use science and technology to keep it strong and to keep it competitive and to keep it global? Because Alan this morning was saying one of the new changes in the economic scene is that you don't look only just about your domestic market, you have to look at the global market, because this is now a globalization of the marketplace. So how does one use technology to keep one's own major economic activity still to maintain is important, and how to go global? That is one part. The second part is which part of our economy which is most at risk, and can we use science, technology, and innovation to revive that? Again, with global marketplace as the final objective. And the other part, the third one was, is there any new area which has got most potential in terms of your country, because you have the natural resources, you are close to a big marketplace for it, your labor has got a special skill for this, or whatever other comparative advantage you have. In Malaysia, we keep bringing up this example of composite material manufacturing. We thought that we have a special advantage of that, and we went into that, and now in Malaysia we are producing most of the composite components of Airbus and of Boeing aircraft, starting from zero. The Airbus A330 or 380 Airbus, the biggest airliner now, all the components on that aircraft is manufactured in Malaysia, on the composite part of it. So, what new area which has most potential for your country? And then the fourth one is, what about new technology? What about this nanotechnology, biotechnology, whatever you call it? How do you translate that to help your economic activity, and not just getting excited about it is a brand new technology, you can be excited about that, but how do you translate that to strengthen your economic activity? That is leveraging technology for the economic sector. In my book, you may be thinking now I'm plugging for my book. I am. I'm plugging for this book which is up there. I said this in my book. This is what I call Science and Technology for Policy. No use writing a book and nobody read it. So read this. Anyway, this is what I call
Omar,
STI
you
for
wanted
policy.
to say buy this.
Oh yes.
You can buy from Ireland. Now,
With discount.
That is leveraging. If you want to leverage, then you have to strengthen your STI capacity and capability. That is anchoring. And that is about putting in more money, building in more infrastructure, training people, and all that kind of thing. That is anchoring to increase the capacity so that you can deliver. So this is, I thought we need to do that. Once you recognize these are the things that you can do to help existing strong sector of the economy, maybe to help the most at risk, and then to look at the one with most potential, and to take advantage of the new technology. Once you have that, once you have identified that, I call that the national STI agenda. This is what national science policy should be, to identify the national STI agenda, and then put all your resources in order to move that. To move that, I said you need you need a total human resource capacity. You need a champion, and a champion need advice. This is where we come to science advice. And then we need the people to popularize this. You need the planners and the managers. You need the educators, and then you need, of course, the people who actually do them. So in this book, this is a total national, the complete human resource to move the national STI agenda. Then we come to one particular part of this, which we talked about earlier, science advice. If you have a champion, your president or your prime minister or your king, he would want advice. This is advisor as an individual, but you may need advice in a form of organization or a structure, National Advisory Council, national and international. And this is where we talked about earlier about foresight and all that coming to being. So you need a champion. The champion will need an advisor, and then you need the managers and the planners and the managers, and then you need the educators, and you need the actual people doing science and technology. The detail is in this book. Go and buy from Mahela. Now,
how much
even in Malaysia at the moment? We have just done our third national science policy. I was instrumental in shaping that. So the Malaysia third national science policy talk about STI for policy, policy for STI and private sector, which is what I have been trying to promote. We have a beautiful policy now, and we have a whole series of wish lists. We want this, we want that, we want that. At the moment in Malaysia, I'm not sure that this wish list will actually be met, because there is a disconnect between science policy and national development policy. If the science policy is not integrated into national development policy, you are not going to get your resource allocation. You're not going to get your money or whatever it is. At the moment in Malaysia, there is a disconnect. And I believe in many countries, there is this disconnect. Can I mention about Seychelles? Because I was recently in Paris reporting to UNESCO about what we are doing in terms of science policy training for UNESCO member countries. And the Honorable Permanent Representative of Seychelles was listening to my talk. He came to me and said, Dr. Omar, I have a beautiful science policy for Seychelles written in 2011. Can you look at it and comment? I have nothing to comment because it's a beautiful policy. The only comment was, how are you going to implement this beautiful policy? Because policy is only just a declaration of intent with a lot of wish lists. And that wish list, if it is not connected to the planning and the resource allocation in the country, is not going to happen. So, effective governance for science, technology, and innovation is very, very important. And anchoring and leveraging technology requires an efficient STI governance system in the country. It's not in Malaysia. I was telling my friend, the minister, having a Ministry of Science can be a disadvantage. Because whenever you talk about science and technology, they say this is ours. And yet science cut across all the many ministries. So unless you bring that up the national level that cuts across all ministries, it's not going to move. So every time we bring up the idea about a governance for science that cut across all the ministries, the Ministry of Science says, no, I don't want that. And until today, we haven't got an official STI governance system in Malaysia, which is to my frustration. So I leave it there. Please, can you take over?
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Omar. I will take up from where you left and hopefully lay the ground for David to come in. I just wanted to focus on two issues, really. The institutional framework, the institutions and the networks. I think in the morning, we had how the core values of smart partnership unfolded over time and how this has led to quite some intense human interactions through networking, through sharing. These are the terms that were being used in the morning, and also through ensuring participation in various initiatives, particularly the national visioning process. And key to networking is the capacity and importance of bonding between the different smart partners. And that bonding over time, in terms of sharing the accumulated knowledge which is built within the network, and on the basis of the various linkages that arise from, on the one hand, the various activities and events related to the dialoguing process, and then on the other, the thought processes and the impacts. That creates the kind of network that I believe is a basis for putting together sustainable institutions which can be used for the application of technologies and sciences in the various national, regional, or even at a global level. And in terms of the networks, I just wanted us to focus perhaps at a national level on the strategic location of institutions that should propel the application, or conveying the application of science and technology to developing specific sectors within the economy. In that strategic location, I think Dr. Omar just mentioned that there's always this issue of location, of issues related to science and technology. Should they be under a ministry? Should they be under a department? Or should they be independently located but strategically positioned to benefit from the centers of power, be they the Prime Minister's office or the President's office? I think that is quite key, because it also has a relationship in terms of capacity or ability to access resources for research and development. And also, I suppose, to be able to push the various developments in that economy. I believe that the discussion that we had this morning, there is just one item that I wanted to pick up from the discussion. I think it was Alan who talked of his return from Latin America and what he saw in terms of the linkages between Latin American countries, African countries, and that there is so much that has happened in the last 20 to 30 years in terms of scientific, technological, and other globalization development, which has seen an impact, a major impact in terms of the dynamics of the development process. And I think perhaps as we discuss, we need to look at that specific impact of the developments in the scientific and technological areas, the ICTs areas, particularly in relation to the issues of financial inclusion. I was just discussing with a colleague the example that we have in Zimbabwe, where Econet, which is one of the, well, it's a big telecoms company. Yes, you have the financial institutions, the banks, but that telecoms company now has moved innovatively into providing services to provide cash to
people right in the rural areas, in the very remotest areas, as long as somebody there has got a registered, Eco Cash number. And all you need is your number, cell number, to transact. In sending cash, receiving cash, in saving EcoSave, and now they've even gone to the extent of linking up with farmers so that farmers can get information on the farming season, even insurance, providing insurance services. All this is technology that is taking place, which is impacting on the manner in which we do business, and which obviously has to be incorporated when one looks at policy making and policy development. Just finally, I wanted to share with you a development. This is not just science advice, but now this is implementation. The application of an ethanol producing factory in Zimbabwe. This is a factory that manufactures anhydrous ethanol from sugarcane to supply possibly the region with a clean, efficient, renewable fuel source. And I think at the end of the day, I do hope that whatever science advice we profile at a national, at a regional level, results in projects that can impact concretely and positively in ensuring that not only a service is provided, but that perhaps that service is provided in a manner that is also environmentally friendly. I think I'll leave it there for you, Dave, and you can pick it up from there.
Just Chris, before there are one or two things that, because you've done a little bit more than just simply introducing a kind of new insights that we require on advice on science or pervasiveness of science, not only government or public security. You've done a little bit more, each of you. Are there any immediate reactions thinking fast on that? Because, yeah.
There's one reaction
Yeah.
that there may be a disconnect between science advice and policy. Policy is something that means choice in government. Science is not always ready to make choices, especially science that is evidence-based. When the evidence is not clear, science has a duty to say it is not clear. Whereas policy says we don't care whether it's clear, we need a decision today. And this is the difficulty that I've been involved in personally in terms of some questions of, are we ready to do this policy for climate change or not? Should we deal with nanotechnology in this way or not? Sometimes science is not ready to make those policy-based decisions. So it's important to have clarity about when evidence is required or not in policy.
What sort of evidence? Because I should have science evidence. Maybe David, you come here as Ambusa, Chief Cabinet Secretary.
No.
Do you have an advisor?
No, I just want to react to what he said. Because in my previous life, I used to be in environment. And we were talking about climate change way back. And the argument was, particularly from the Americans, that without the science, without the evidence, nothing's going to happen. And the other group was saying, look, by the time the evidence comes, it will be too late. So we need to decide now. We need to deal with climate change without the evidence. When the evidence comes, it will be too late. It will all be gone.
Yes, and then you're dealing with the precautionary principle, which has its own set of policy conditions attached to it.
Anybody else dares to say that's a policy, that's the science evidence before David comes in? Because that's the reason exactly why we brought David in. Alan.
Just maybe an issue of semantics that has been trotting in my head since we started the discussion this morning between prediction, foresight, and vision. Prediction is when you think that something is going to happen.
That's very
You know the story of Cassandra. Cassandra was the beautiful daughter of the king of Troy, and Apollo, the beautiful
Yeah.
god, fell in love with her. And she said yes, so he bestowed a gift to her that she was able to predict what was going to happen. And then she refused to become his wife. So he cursed her, and he said, well, you are going to predict that nobody is going to listen to you. So that's prediction. Now, foresight is what we talked about this morning, and usually it comes in the form of various scenarios. And usually that's how you go about constructing your vision, is first you consider the scenarios, the SWOT analysis and the various possibilities and so on. And then the vision is when you make a political decision. This is how these are the scenarios, or the scenario we are going to try to implement, and that requires a decision. So prediction, foresight, and vision. And to decide on the vision, well, as we have been saying, it's an iterative process where you consider scenarios, you test them. For instance, in the Seychelles, there was even an exhibition showing to the people the various scenarios, the various possibilities. But then at one point in time, you have to decide. And you decide through a more or less democratic process, and you take, or you don't take, the predictions or the foresight that has been given to you to choose between various scenarios, the vision you have for the country, and what you would like to achieve. So this was just a contribution of semantics. The vision needs a political decision at one point, and the more it is based on a democratic process, the better it is understood, but sometimes somebody has to decide.
Now, can I just, I beg your pardon, can I just make one more point? The point I want to make is that don't assume it's all about government. It's not. It's also about the private sector, and it's also about the market.
Exactly.
And you need an awareness of that, because it won't work if you just try and control it all. And it is an important judgment about the degree of control any government should try to take over this process. It's just a sort of word of warning, if you like.
David Grimes, sir, we're discussing about a number of issues of our life. Maybe to have an advisor on science, technology, and don't call him science advisor, in your office. What would be now a question you would ask him? Do you want to know? Not about how he does his advice, but what would be that urgent issue on which you need to take a policy together with colleagues and president and others. Please, just see if he can answer how you could do it.
Yeah, I think maybe I have to listen to him first.
No.
You will, okay, yeah. No, you see, in our situation, you have a setup that will give you a little bit of problems, because the institutions are set up in such a way that most of the technical institutions have got a properly selected person that we believe could be the advisor to the government overall. Now, of course, it is constitutional in our case for president to appoint a special, to appoint somebody who is technical in the field that you want to be advised. Now, many times the president will look at the type of ministry, and his appointment will basically look at if it is totally technical ministry, we will look at somebody with that knowledge. Even if that person is not a member of the ruling party, he is allowed to do that. Now, my fear is when you have got somebody appointed as a technical person in that technical office, and you add another one between the president and that technical person, then you will have easily a conflict of opinions. Let me give you an example. We had a minister who is an agriculturalist, and he was really able in his field. And then we had they are from the same group. They were all Germans. And then we had in the same ministry a veterinary director who is a truly specialist in his field. Now, that was not due to the appointment of a specialist by the president, but we had it difficult to control these two. Because everybody felt so important as an expert in the field that they did not listen to each other. But I will fully agree that indeed systems differ. But in our case, what President does is to have a group of people who will be appointed to advise him, not an individual, but a group of people who will be appointed to advise him on technical issues. So when you have got a group of people, the working is different from an individual who is occupying that office as an individual. Then the advice that they give goes through the responsible minister or directly to the president. I think in our situation it's a little bit difficult. But of course, I am very much interested in what he's going to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me to speak. My problem is that I've been making so many notes on what everybody said, I can't read what I originally wrote I was going to say. But what you just said is absolutely spot on. You have to understand about the structure, the governance structure, and where the device is coming from. And it doesn't matter how great the experts are. In fact, it might matter even more if you get two great experts and put them head to head. You're quite right. You will get all sorts of interesting and difficult issues to deal with. The other point which has just come up, which is about science and policy and the difference between the two. Science is the servant of policy, and I say that as a scientist and an engineer. It is because you have to take decisions. I can't remember who the speaker was who was talking about climate change, and yes, you said. That's right. Talking about having to take a decision, right? I couldn't agree more. Although I am, as I say, scientist and engineer, right, all the way down to inner parts of my body. You know, I absolutely believe in evidence. I believe evidence is really important for taking informed decisions. But that is not the same as being a politician or a policymaker. Because a politician or a policymaker has to take decisions and has to look at what might be conflicting advice, especially if you have two eminent experts, and you cannot afford the worst thing to do is to not to take a decision. Okay. So we recognise that science and policy, in that sense, have a very strange relationship. One of the things that you might get told, or that people might say, is of course what you should do is somehow have somebody with expertise, science advice, and somehow that gets the policymakers nod, and then all will be well, and it turns then into good policy. Nobody in this room who has had any experience whatsoever of science and technology advice recognizes that linear model of going from science to policy. It never, never, never happens like that. And yet you can read in book after book and in a lot of academic approaches this model of how things ought to work as opposed to the way things do work. So how do things work as opposed to how we would like them to work? Because it's better to start with human beings and how they operate and then build up from there. Well, why are we sitting in this room? We're sitting in this room because we're exchanging ideas. When I was asked by the University of Cambridge about 4 years ago to start the Centre for Science and Policy,
Why not science policy?
because we go one direction. We go from science and technical advice to policy. This is not about policy for science. Okay? So I just go that way. There are other experts who can tell you about the journey that way. Okay? I will tell you about how you that particular direction. So I was asked to do science and policy. And it followed a very successful series of a series of meetings where we brought permanent secretaries and occasionally some senior politicians from London to tell them about a particular topic. Genetic engineering, space flight, migration, obesity, cloning. All of these were topics which at that time were very leading edge. A lot of people know all about those topics now and we're familiar, we read about them in the papers. But the idea was to take people from the science all the way through to the policy implications. And it started with the academics and gradually handed over to the policymakers by the time you got to the end of the day. Now, that's a model which worked very well at that particular time in those particular circumstances. The reason why what I do now, and I'll explain a little bit about it in a second, the reason what I do now is that we in the United Kingdom have a network of chief scientific advisors, which is partly as a result of those meetings. It was decided that that science advice needed to be more deeply embedded into government. And people have less time. People are very busy. And I'll get on to some of the other things that go on, for example, about open innovation in a second, because that's another part of this process that's changing in the way that we operate, in the way that politics operate, in the way that you have to incorporate not only what governments can do, but also about the private sector. So I use some of the experience that I'd had in doing some other things. I helped found a thing called Cambridge Angels, which we fund companies in Cambridge. There are about 55 of us, and I was chairman of that. That is a networking organisation that operates at Cambridge and helps fund new startups. I helped found a thing called Cambridge Network, which Cambridge Network has 1,400 members, individuals and mostly companies, and we exchange views about what is going on in Cambridge, and we also have a training arm which allows companies to buy training and we design training courses to help companies in Cambridge. I started Cambridge Wireless, which is a networking organisation based in Cambridge, surprisingly enough. About 400 members, includes all the big names, and that has a very different structure. We have special interest groups that meet once or twice a year and exchange ideas.
Why is it called wireless?
Why is it called wireless? Because it is all about everything you can do with radio systems. Okay? Cambridge has a relatively long tradition in radio systems and is one of the great clusters in radio, as it is one of the great clusters in biotech. Now, all of those things taught me stuff, right? I began my career as a consultant, and consultants have to get business, they have to talk to people. I noticed that actually talking to people tended to lead to business, but it also led to interesting conversations and all sorts of things like that. And I also noticed that when I started these networking organizations, if I gave a lot into this network, a lot of good things came back. Not necessarily in terms of commercial gain, but just meeting interesting people and doing interesting things that you would never otherwise have had the chance to do. So an economist is somebody who sees something working in practice and can't help wondering if it works in theory. And so, I thought, why does this work? It's one of these obvious questions. It works. We all, we network together here. We know other people. Why does this work? What is actually going on? And it turns out that actually, if you want to dig into the mathematics of this, there are actually some very good reasons for the way in which networks actually work. Everybody's heard about 6 degrees of freedom. I first read about that as an experiment when I was in the 6th form at school. So I was 17 when I read that. So that is a long time ago. And so 43 years ago, okay, when I read about it.
What is a 6 degree?
Okay, the 6 degrees of freedom was a very interesting experiment. Somebody in the United States was given an envelope. There was no address on the envelope, although there was an indication about the person and what their trade was. So you could make a guess that they might be an architect. And what you might do then, if they saw they were an architect, you might pass that to a friend of yours who was an architect, who would then pass it on to the next most likely person. Right? And on that went. The average number of hops between the population of the United States, which at that time was 230 million people, not 300 million people, 230 million people, the average number of hops to get from the origin to the destination was 6. That's all it took. And that was, now, in network theory, this is a directed search, but you don't know the shape of the whole network, you don't know who's in the network, you don't know how they're all connected, but you just try to go from node to node until you have found the target. Okay? That's what 6 degrees of freedom is originally about. It's slightly different these days when people talk about it, but everybody is connected. I guarantee that I am no more than probably 3 hops away from every single person in this room, including all the people that I've never met. Yeah, we discovered that.
We discovered that.
We have people in common, right? And hadn't met Mihaela before. We have people in common. I guarantee.
Cable and wireless, Jonathan Solomon.
I guarantee there is nobody. Given that I'm standing in this room, I pretty well know that there's probably no more than 2 people between me and everybody in this room. I know somebody who knows you.
That's what I know.
Okay? We all know Mihaela, so actually it's only one. Now this is an important point, because Mihaela is a supernode, right? Mihaela is very well connected. If you want to do something, and you wanted to do something in this topic area, where would you go to? Well, I would go to Mihaela. That's natural, isn't it? Because she knows everybody. She can put you in touch with everybody. She can get things done. Okay? So we observe this. What is really going on? Well, I'll do a little bit of just a little bit of description of mathematics for a moment, because this is quite important to understand. What you find is there are some people, a few. If you took everybody you knew and you drew a graph of this person knows the most people, this is the second most, third most, fourth most, fifth most, you would have a nice little straight line as it happens, in the ratio between one person knows 30% more than the next person, and that applies all the way down. At the top end, there are people who know thousands of people. If you get to them, you can get to everybody else in the network. Now let's go back to science advice, because this is a really important issue for how do you get science advice spreading into government. Well, the answer is not to get somebody who is an absolute expert in their field who has no friends. On two counts. One, they probably have no friends because they're a bit difficult to deal with. And the second one, and more important, is that they don't act as a gatekeeper to all the other advice that you actually need. If you look at the problem that the UK had at the time when we had the BSE crisis, that is the mad cow disease problem. The issue at that point was not that we didn't have available the scientific advice about what to do. It was simply that the people who were giving that advice were closed up and were not well connected to give a broad spectrum and a broad reach. Okay? Now, a lot of work actually has been done without thinking about the theory, about how this can change. And one of the things that I've been doing at the University of Cambridge is to try and build a network that does the stuff without you needing to really push or work hard. So this is a wonderful solution. I'm an engineer, by the way. I like to do things for the least possible effort, right? Engineers are basically very lazy. They design systems to do work for them at the lowest cost and with the least possible effort. So what we do is we bring in civil servants for 5 days to Cambridge. Those civil servants provide us with a list of questions that they want to talk about. From that list of questions, we then identify academics at Cambridge and at other universities, and perhaps some companies as well, private sector, who they should talk to. And we identify those people that they should talk to, not on the basis of a narrow definition of the answer to the question, but on what is going to be really interesting and might throw up something unexpected. We have now, just to give you some numbers, around about 110 of these policy fellows. They occupy many of the senior levels in government, and you will be talked to by, unsurprisingly, one of our policy leader fellows, Jeff Mulgan, is one of our policy leader fellows, and in fact he came up to Cambridge last week, it must be last week, to have a discussion with us and attend a workshop and attend a dinner with other people to do that network. So we have built a formal network, because it is formal, we have policy fellows, but across that formal network, a few interesting things happen. Firstly, if people in government need advice, we have provided a very broad pool from which they can draw that advice. They can not only go direct to the academics, they can also now go to their other policy fellows and ask them if they know somebody who would actually be able to answer a particular question. The result of that is we know that the communications that flow across that network have changed government policy in the United Kingdom on a number of occasions, including material that was in the Chancellor's autumn statement.
Such as?
Now I'll get you on to the next bit. Okay, very important. We are not doing this as open public activity. If you want to do science democracy or policy making that's open policy making, that is a different thing. And I fully support it. It's a very good thing to do. It's very important to have people involved. But what we are doing is providing a network that allows information and knowledge, understanding, contacts to be made as quickly and efficiently as possible. I don't know where this...
level.
Sorry?
Boardroom levels.
Well, no, we have junior policy fellows, so we'll have young, fast-track civil servants, like Mitchell Harris, who was at the Ministry of Defence and is now working in the Cabinet Office. He's 27, I guess, something like that, 26. We have Director Generals, level 5 in our civil service. I don't know how everybody else works, but people who are kind of mid to senior-ish people who are probably everywhere in the world. They're the people who are mostly making the policy. Then we have the policy leader fellows, who are the people at the top, the Director Generals, the people who are running ministries, and those are the people who, and we have separate cadres for those, so they can network together. So we cover everything. I'm so way off what I was going to say here. The point about this is that once you understand how networks work, and once you understand that everybody is very close, and you understand that there are some supernodes, you can actually help create supernodes. You can actually help allow people, like our policy fellows, to establish lots of connections that will then serve them well in their job, in what they're supposed to be doing. And now I'll get on to some recommendations about science advice. If you want a good scientific advisor, the good scientific advisor has to be trained in science, because you don't want somebody who doesn't understand the scientific method, or has to be trained in engineering. They have to be a STEM subject of some kind. Otherwise, it's very difficult for somebody coming from history or languages or whatever to understand, or politics and philosophy. Well, philosophy is not bad, actually. Philosophy will teach you quite a lot. But the difference between science and policy is so great, as I described at the beginning. You want to start with people over on the scientific side. But they don't hold the answers. They are the people who have to have access to the network. And so what you want to do is have people like that who are good at networking, who can then go and get the answers, and not just from their friends, not just from the 6 mates who they might go and drink a beer with, but from a very, very large pool that they maintain. Hundreds or even thousands of people that they know about. And it's that breadth which is really important. I just want to say a little bit about, just very briefly, about policymakers and open systems. That is almost an open system, but it's not quite. It differs from a truly open system in the sense that if it were truly open, then you would be soliciting input from everybody in the general public, in the same way that Wikipedia solicits expert advice, of course, but it's solicited from the external. It is not a replacement, and I don't think either is a replacement for the other. Open systems, open policy making is very important as part of a democratic process, but in order to get the scientific advice and take some of the hard decisions, I go back to my point about not talking about what the decisions were or what the particular policy outcome was. It's very important, because the policy makers, the politicians, have to be protected in a sense, and so do the communication channels and the people giving the advice. You want to make sure that nobody is in the press able to write headlines about the stupid decisions or the stupid advice that is being given, or really bad, that the advice that was given was not what the policymaker then decided, right? Because the policymaker has to be free to ignore the advice, right? It is really, really important. I'd say 2 more things, very briefly. Serendipity. My favourite word. I was going to say in the English language, but of course serendipity isn't really English, it comes from Sri Lanka. And it's about trying hard to do things and good things happen. And that's what networking is about. And networking really works when you put more in, as I said right at the beginning. With the technology that we've got, the fact that I can carry around in my iPhone, all the gadgets and communications technology that you would have previously had 3 or 4 suitcases to carry, enables you to do networking at a level that was previously impossible, and at timescales that were previously impossible. We are changing the way in which we are governed. We are changing the way in which we involve people in the policy decisions. We are changing the way in which we can network. We should acknowledge all of that. We should be building networks ourselves so that we can do things like get the best policy, engineering, technical advice into government. But don't let us confuse the fundamentals. Don't ever let us think that science and evidence advice substitutes for policy making. Those 2 things are different. Thank you very much.
thing that you probably did behind the scene was to welcome the new chief science. What is he called? New
Chief Scientific Advisor.
Fine. Katy probably knows about it, about that sort of thing too. There was in April, 14th of April,
Yep.
there was a change of the new government scientific advisor in this country. And something which was quite extraordinary was that there was one day which prepared him, to listen to a number of these things, including the issue of networks and all the rest of it. Why did you do that? There were about 6 months or 4 months in advance preparations for him to listen, and then the other day he chose Cambridge to come and talk about the IPCC report and Britain. So he's attracted to your network, or
Okay.
you attract him? Which one?
Well, okay. I'll wind the clock back a little bit. We had the previous scientific advisor, chief scientific advisor, up to Cambridge, and he'd not really heard of the Centre for Science and Policy because we were quite new. But in his speech, he said, "I asked my staff about the Centre for Science and Policy, and I found that 3 of them were already policy fellows of the Centre for Science and Policy." Okay. So we had already established within the scientific advisory community a real presence. It happens, I don't think this has anything to do with it, but on the 6 degrees of separation, it happens that Mark Walport, who's the chief scientific advisor, is a very good friend of a friend of mine because they both live in Putney. But that's just part of how small a world this is. The real reason I think for doing this was that we had our annual conference at the right time. It's always good to have a coincidence like that. And we had as Mark Walport's chief of staff, somebody who was also somebody that I had worked with on foresight programs before, and therefore we were able to go to her and to say to her, "We're doing this annual report, we would like to do something really significant." I mean, there are some very interesting essays in there, and I'd recommend Jeff Mulgan's one, for example, right at the beginning, about how scientific advice gets put into government and how perhaps it should be and what the issues might be. And it was really quite obvious, I think, to the incoming chief scientific advisor at that point that this conference was a good platform for him to make his first speech. And if you want to see, there's a video on YouTube of me interviewing Mark about precisely all of that. But so the reasons for it, let me just try and summarize. The reasons for this are because we had established a network which was already working, communicating about scientific advice. And Mark Walport, who comes from a business background as head of the Wellcome Trust, as a chief executive, understood the power of networks and was very happy then to reinforce it.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
I
Immediate reaction.
Let's get some questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So what you're saying is as if you have a situation where you have scientists and science advisors on one hand, and policymakers on the other hand. This is now a democratic system where the policymakers are being elected. But now, what about having policymakers?
Network.
No, policymakers who are themselves scientists. For example, I understand from what some friends tell me in China, many of the ministers are scientists themselves, which is why they do things. They are not lawyers who will discuss about the meaning of one word, but they are action oriented. They are builders. They are engineers.
They are, by the way, they are engineers, not scientists. There's a
but
big distinction.
No. The training, the mind, the background.
You're quite right.
It's
You're quite right.
You have to be scientifically minded to be an engineer. There's always this question of cause and effect. You have to have it at the back of your mind, and then you expect results. So this is the situation where perhaps it's a question of looking at the whole system of putting in and scientists themselves
at the head of governance?
Well, I mean, I can't speak for every country. I can't speak for every governance system. I can speak for the United Kingdom because I know it very well. In the United Kingdom, we tend to find people who get trained in politics, philosophy, and economics, who then have a career in politics. They don't necessarily touch business. There are only 6 scientists or fewer than that in the whole of the House of Commons. If you want to get scientists and engineers, you have to go to the House of Lords because they generally, there are a lot of them there, and they have a great deal of interesting things to say. But in the democratic process that we have at the moment, the way in which politicians get elected is actually being a scientist or being an engineer is actually very bad. And I will say, just so that you understand how bad this is, I will say if we're you know, this may get broadcast, but I will say Julian Huppert is one of the very few scientists in the House of Commons. He is the MP for Cambridge, and he gets shouted at in the House of Commons for being a scientist. Right? No, I am serious. I am serious, right? And so you have to understand. You have to understand what is going on in politics and the way in which those people are selecting themselves. What we are doing at the Centre for Science and Policy is trying to correct that, but we can't do it through. We can't change democracy. Democracy is democracy, and it needs to work properly. It needs to be left to function. We are trying to get scientific advice into government.
But this democracy is more of a autocracy because it's a government of the party, by the party, for the party. In that case, it's not democracy.
Well, this is a dinner conversation.
No, I think it's a very clear and powerful presentation. There are few clarifications. You see, normally there is a Ministry of Science and Technology, which is headed by, in our case, Secretary, which is the highest bureaucrat. Always a scientist.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay.
Always a scientist. Then there is also a minister who answers questions in the parliament and so on. And we have science advisor to the Prime Minister.
Right.
Now, none of these are networked amongst themselves. Each one has its own network. And in your scenario, do the other entities exist or they don't?
Well,
or if so, how is that related to the advice your network gives?
Right, very good, excellent question. So, if you have a Ministry of Science and Technology, and ours is in part in BIS, the Business, Industry and Skills, and David Willits is the minister who looks after that. That mostly is policy towards science. How much are we spending on science? How much are we spending on engineering and training and those kinds of things, which is industry and skills. That's not my. I mean, of course, I would like more spent on that, but that's not what we're doing.
Correct.
We are doing it the other way around. If government wants to take a policy decision, what is the best evidence, which might come from economics, social science, might come from science, mathematics, might come from computing, it might be engineering. What is the best advice, what is the best evidence and the best advice? And then, because you are the democratically elected politician, you have the final say, right? And the policymakers must have the final say. It's absolutely clear. We are networking people together so that at least they can be aware that if one bit of government is doing something, maybe the other bit of government ought to know about it, and our policies should at least be consistent.
But that's important because you cut across.
Yes, we cut across.
That's the key.
Yes. Thank you very much for that expose on networks. Because networks have significant bearing on concept that resides in our topic that we have to conclusion. I'd like to ask you if you could say a word on information issues of identity protection
Identity protection and security. Well, yes. When we're talking about networks in general, one of the great confusions, you see it in the press, and by your question, you're not confused about this at all. One of the great confusions you see in the press is the notion that somebody can eavesdrop on your conversation, and somehow listening into the conversation is the important thing. Listening into the conversation is the least important thing when you're doing surveillance, or when you want to know what's going on. It is the pattern of communication, it is the network that you have that tells more about you than anything else. The very, very depressing fact about human beings is that we are extremely predictable. And you can predict what we are going to do simply by watching the communication patterns and the location. So when you raise this subject, raise this topic, it's a very important one. Yeah. Because we are entering a world in which there is no privacy, in which what we do and the prediction of what we will do can be known by anybody who cares to put enough computing power to work. And as we know from the last few months, there are plenty of people who are prepared to put enough computing power into making that a possibility. You can protect yourself, you can protect privacy, you can protect identity if you want to. There are you can talk to some of my colleagues in the computer laboratory in Cambridge who are working on some of these things, and various other people within the university working on those kinds of elements of security and anonymity. But it is in the nature of an arms race in which one person will get slightly ahead, and then the other will catch up, and then somebody will get slightly ahead, and the other will catch up. That is the world in which we live.
David, I think we need to have another session on this one.
It's always an interesting topic.
It's terribly interesting.
Yes,
and, I think Omar probably would like to. I think we need to move on, but you go ahead, Ellie.
Thank you very much. One of the things that Smart Conversation about is that everything has a balance. Albert Einstein said, we cannot solve today's problem with the same level of thinking that created the problem in the first place. And I see ourselves spending a lot of time because my most respected chairman, Omar, as a science advisor, because we have many great scientists like Ashok and others whom I admire and respect. But the experience of the world has shown that the problem of the world is not shortage of resources, is not shortage of knowledge, is not shortage of scientists, it's shortage of smart ideas. And a few examples of countries which progressed, when you look at who are responsible, you find few scientists. The question of networks which we have brought is very relevant, especially in our times. Because those who change in society rely on their ability to communicate with the masses. That's always the linking factor. How are you able to communicate with the masses? As we speak these days, the best communicators are musicians, whether you like it or not. We have a song, one of our musicians has a statement, he sings that these days things of the world are funny. That he sings his song, it reaches the highest places in big cars and in big houses, and it leaves him where he is. Because his song, once it's put on the radio, it reaches all the high places, and for him he remains a poor person. Now, when we say, and most of the scientists spend most of their time in labs researching. And as you said, when you come to politicians, the style in which they communicate is determined by the level of research and its limitations. And I have always said that with all due respect, professors who are those who know so much about so little. With a friend of mine doing a PhD in the rare amino acids in the brain of a tick. And he's going to spend 5 years in Australia in the lab, in the brain of a tick on rare amino acids. In the brain of a tick. What I wanted is the science advisor. How much has he played? How much has the science advisor played in bringing, we want examples in the world, in bringing real transformations? But I don't know whether Bill Gates is a scientist. I don't think he is. I don't know whether Churchill was a scientist. I don't know whether General Park of South Korea, who did not, when they were to do a bridge, did not have to look for an engineer. We look for a good person, said, ensure, supervise that bridge, and it is done well. If it is not done well, fire and store. And as a result, yes, as a result, he changed that country. What I wanted us to emphasize on, while we listen to the importance of networks, is how can we smartly use it, avoiding the biases of classrooms. I always tell you, I started an association of the gray-haired and bald-headed. When they came together, what we found out was much of the knowledge was not in those who were highly educated, but much of the knowledge was the experiences, the practical experiences of life from the old people. Yeah. When they shared their real life, the young and dynamic came up and said, we also want to be part of it. So I would like to hear how, away from the scientific advice and from science, because I always ask, is it the science of art or the art of science? Is an artist a scientist? Is a scientist an artist? Because once we don't create that balance, we can have biases of a classroom that will continue to make us think away than involve and include everybody. Educated in classroom, uneducated outside classroom, educated in science, uneducated in science, and we create that balance.
I'm not going to answer that. That was great.
Yeah. Well, just I was reading the other day on romantic partnerships and the dispersion of social ties. I did put a network analysis of relationship. And they say the way you measure networks is embeddedness and dispersion. So I don't know where we leave it here for the
This
moment.
is, if anybody is interested, this paper is part of the required reading for the Coursera course. Everybody heard about Coursera? An open community so you can take courses. It's called Network Life, and it's given by Professor Michael Cairns. And I am a very poor student of Michael Cairns. I didn't find enough. I started to do his course this September, and I didn't finish it because I didn't have enough time. But this paper is one of the required bits of required reading on that network.
It's about romantic partnerships.
About romantic partnerships, but all networks are like this.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Have you distributed them?
Pardon?
Yeah,
I did distribute.
Yeah. It's in here. Okay.
It's not on a face to face.
I have to go with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's innovation networks.
First of all, I have to start with a few introductory remarks. The first one I would like to make is call your attention to Murphy's Law. I've been announced to speak about, according to this program, to why innovation fails. And that's exactly not a topic that I want to talk about, and that's why I showed this slide. It should be why innovations fail. Yeah, the whole story I'm told that is
Seem to fail.
9 out of 10 innovations fail for a variety of reasons that I'll talk about. But the one that succeeds makes it all correct, makes it all work. That's why innovation is a good thing, although 9 out of 10 fail. So the title is very important. This Murphy's Law and I come back to that later, is present here. Yeah, it is about why innovations do not always succeed, why they rather fail. So, this thing, my first comment. The second one is, you might be a bit disappointed about the story I'm going to tell. I wrote a book about this topic, and it's there next to Omar's book about policy. And people who've read it say, well, it's very interesting, very good stuff. But when they talk about innovation, I want to be inspired by the success. And this is about why things go wrong. And it's not inspirational, it is down to earth. You know, it's very useful, but not inspirational. So, again, I may have to disappoint you. The third one is, if I want to explain why innovations tend to fail, I have to start with the boring part, talk about what is innovation, because you have to understand innovation, and there is a lot of misunderstanding about innovation before I can explain that. And that's why when I first say, what is innovation? And it's a four-step definition, because it's a four-step process. Innovation is, what I say, is turning a good idea, a creative idea, or an invention into an insightful concept, product concept. And the product I usually very generically, it can be a process, a software thing, a reorganization, yeah, a variety of things, but generic word product is used here. And I think I use the word insightful in my book, but in this smart environment, I think the word smart should have been used. It's used to make a good idea into a smart concept. And that concept you have to bring to the market, preferably successfully, and usually build a business out of it. So that's the four-step process. A good idea is not good enough. That's why you say, what is a smart concept? Yeah? And that have two things. It has to create value for customers, so that people are going to use it. So that's the whole idea. There's a difference between an invention and innovation. An invention is some knowledge, and innovation is used by people in a variety of circumstances. And the second one is, you can deliver it. Yeah? Because you have to require capabilities, the finances, and the markets. Yeah? It's more than just a good idea. To give you an example or two examples, and I've used one when I talked at the University of Delhi, and maybe, as you can say, comment on it. I used the example in Delhi. I think it's a very good idea when somebody proposes, let's make Delhi dust free, because it's very dusty there. And so yeah, you can say that's a very good idea, you know, because 10 million people or thereabouts will benefit from it when it's a bit less dusty. But, you know, can it be delivered? No. You know, so it's not very insightful. That's not a concept you can bring to the market. Good idea, but, you know, the other way around is, and maybe people who live in hotter climate than the Netherlands I come from, is an invention about 150 years ago. Somebody, before the air conditioning time, somebody invented a chair, a rotating chair, that if you rotated the chair, you know, it blew cold air into your face. You know, and it could be delivered. He made it. You know, you can make it. But does it create value? Well, apparently it didn't have many customers. It is now in the Institute of Forgotten Innovation. You know, but again, you know, and that I'll come back to the example. You know, it has to be attractive for customers. The third point I would like to make here: innovation is about a structured process. It needs management. And lots of innovations with good ideas, insightful ideas, smart ideas, don't make it because it's managed properly against through the stages from concept to market. And I call it management with momentum because you have to push this idea, this concept forward to the market. You know, and many good ideas, say in the research arena, circle around, getting better and better, more and more refined, but never go to the market. That's why I call it innovation needs management with momentum. Now, I show you the next slide, and I won't talk about it, but it's just, because you can see it in the book if you need it. That's why I say this is enough to show you it's a structured process, yeah, that needs management to push it forward to the end. So why the innovation fails? I've first given four sort of three generic reasons. You know, that are more cultural or whatever. And the first one you have to know. Sorry?
The chairman can't read your slides.
No, but he knows it.
We are closing our eye about him using slides. I'll tell you later why.
I needed the first slide to show that the title was wrong. Yeah? You don't need these slides.
No, that's okay.
That's
And by the
this, basically, as I said already, the chances of success are low.
Yeah.
For radical innovation, new concepts, 1 out of 10 or maybe often less make it to the market. Because, and that's basically there are 3 hurdles to make. Yeah. First of all, the idea has to work. Yeah, the product you are making has to work. The technology has to work. The second one is you have to find customers for it. That's another hurdle, and you need the finances to make the whole process. Now, if you give all these, may start all these 3 hurdles, you have 50% chance of success. Yeah, then already it's 1 out of 8 that will make it. Now, if you then add Murphy's law that something will go wrong, yeah, 1 out of 10 is a good score.
I have a question. Is there a role for public innovation in your scheme?
What do you mean?
Well, there's no market per se, there's no product, there's a process innovation, or something is widely adopted in culture or public life. Can that be innovation?
Not specifically, although it applies, but it has to.
In the Canadian context, we would say that there's room for this, in the sense that for example, anti-smoking campaign has taken over, and the public laws have changed, but there's not change in there's no new product in the market per se, but there's been an innovation in public attitudes and opinion and behavior. Similarly, against drunk driving or vaccine development, things where there's no traditional market.
Yeah, in that sense, it does apply. Because if you look at these sort of no smoking campaigns that you have, all sort of campaigns from the government these days about living healthy, not doing this and not doing that, I think 1 out of 10 is a good score that makes an impact. Most of them come and go and don't change. So in that sense, the learnings of sort of the product-oriented innovation I'm talking about apply equally well
I
to.
certainly agree that it has to be applied.
Yeah.
David Hanson.
Just one point that if we're talking about public innovation or innovation by government, one of the major ways that government can help innovate is by buying products from people who are innovative. In pretty well all my companies that I've had that have been successful, without exception, and all the Cambridge Angels, if you talk to everybody that I work with, if the government has bought services or products early in the life cycle, those companies go on to be successful. And the reason is that investment by itself is not enough. It's precisely what you're talking about the need to actually have something that is useful. But of course, if you have an innovation, you don't really know whether it's useful until it hits the market. And if the government is willing to buy stuff from you, you have a much better chance of succeeding. And your other magic ingredient, which was down the bottom of the slide, is the willingness to listen. And if you're willing to listen, then you have a chance of making a success of the company and a success of the innovation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, if the government helps you as sort of a launch,
which is why for one of my companies, pretty well 60% of everything we sell goes to the United States, and hardly anything we sell comes to the United Kingdom, I'm afraid.
No, you're absolutely right. A launching customer or government helps you along the learning curve is critical. The second point why innovations often fail is yeah, that the entrepreneur who starts is the innovator doesn't understand the process. Yeah, that he doesn't prepare himself enough. He starts too fast before first thinking the whole thing through. Yeah, he has an idea and starts doing it before working out the concept. Probably doesn't understand how to get it financed, doesn't know how to get it to the market. That sort of reasons. And the third one is just mentioned. Yeah, innovators tend to be very stubborn. Yeah, they are fascinated by the idea. Yeah, that's what they call "don't touch my baby." Yeah, and whatever you say, this is my baby. I don't want to change it. And the best advice freely given often passes away. I've had it quite frequently as a consultant. Yeah, that people come to me and say, "Okay, yeah, we're getting the finance." They say, "Yes, of course. Give me your business plan." And then I say, "Yeah, okay, but you first have to change your business plan because this is not going to work." Then they disappear. Yeah, rather go down with their own baby than be successful with the changed one. There are other number of factors that may go wrong. They call this factors for unsuccess, and unsuccess I use it in the sense as failures that could have been avoided if you have done it properly. Yeah? If you have a bad idea and you fail, that's okay. If you had a good, smart idea and it failed because you did it wrong, that's sad. And one of the three things I mentioned, that's one of it is called solution for looking for a problem. You have an idea, a solution for solving the whole problem, and that has to work. Yeah? You don't listen to the customers who are not interested because your solution, that has to go. And that is in a variety of reasons. Yeah? And it can be extreme. Of course, it's very difficult to understand, to know what the customer wants and going to buy or going to use. But you know, being flexible and trying to get in touch with the customer as early as possible and not being fascinated by your own solution but willing to change helps a lot. Then of course you have to be there. If you start for your own business, you have to be the right entrepreneur. Yeah, the clever scientist, the clever technologist or engineer is not good enough. You have to be an entrepreneur, and that is a particular type of entrepreneur, what they call pioneering entrepreneurship. Risk-taking and so on, that's very scarce, and that is one of the requirements you need. And if you don't have it, partner up with somebody who has. And then of course the most typical one everybody knows is getting it financed, yeah? And getting the money, that's very difficult. And there are two main reasons. First of all, the investors look at you when you go with your business plan to the investors, and they look at the idea and they say, okay, that's good. And then they look at you and they say, do you have it what it takes? Yeah, they trust the management. And if they don't trust you that you have it, and you're a brilliant nerd, but you don't have it, in entrepreneurship, then you don't get the money. The second one I mentioned was, and that is a bit complex and I won't explain it, but you never have enough money because all this takes longer than you think, it always is more expensive. And then you have to refinance your enterprise halfway. Now you think that's easy because, you know, I increase the value of my idea continuously. No, it always goes to a dip. And you have to refinance at a low point, what's called the value of death. There, so many good innovations die. And you have to be prepared for it, to manage that process.
So we'll come back on this one on Friday morning.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what does it mean if, and I use the innovation policy here, but I leave that to other people from the business side. But there are a few things that are very important if you want to stimulate innovation in a country. And the first one is since so many innovations are going to fail, if a country has a blame culture, like in Europe and in the Netherlands particularly have it, you know, you fail and you're sentenced for life, you know, you're no good. Like in the States, where you fail in innovator, they say he has experience, he has tried, he has the right spirits, yeah? So that is a very cultural thing that is very important, yeah? And the same thing for entrepreneurship, you need to stimulate entrepreneurship. And when I was young, the big thing was, many parents came to try to become a governmental employee. Secure for life, yeah? Entrepreneurs, risky, don't do it. Innovation will starve, yeah? And then of course, the things that provide risk capital, yeah, instruments, facilities that people can get risk capital, but have linked that to advisory services. Yeah, don't give it just, blindly. Since you are so stubborn and you have to learn a lot, most starters link it, advice with capital provision, but it is, and let the risk takers decide what is worth and what's not worth. Okay.
Thank you, Jan. We'll come back, as I said, for questions and other things, probably Friday and also probably later. But if you were to be not a science advisor's office, or you were in Shell, head of technology, if you haven't looked actually at the profiles, Smart Partners profiles, probably even if you didn't look, you'd realize that he spoke different language. Within Shell as different from within a government, head of innovation and technology. But thank you, Jan.
Okay.
But were you not to be head of a technology innovation or science advice or Center for Public Policy, were you to be a quality and standards institution, and having been asked by government and so on to advise on synthetic biology, Scott, what would you do? Scott is director of DSI.
Can I come over there?
Yeah. But don't take us to synthetic biology. Just
I'm not
tell
going
us
to
what
teach
are
you
you
that.
really doing.
No. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Scott Steedman. I'm Director of Standards at BSI. So I represent the UK on all business and industry standards. But I'm not really here to talk about that or synthetic biology. I wanted to follow from Jan and David in those very interesting presentations around landing innovation. So how is it that we materialize? How do we land that good idea that you have in your community, in your family, in your bath, in your company? How do you land that? We've talked earlier, and there was a question a minute ago about the importance of networks. How do we get out of the classroom? How do we take advantage of people's practical knowledge? To deliver innovation, you need to reach the market. You need to deliver that value to customers. But I have in my mind the idea, often in this room, that succeeding in an innovation process is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. So there's a lot of hard work. And in that hard work, you have to think about two things in particular from a support function. So in addition to all the requirements of funding that Jan has talked about and so on, you need to think about how you're going to protect your ideas and how you're going to share your ideas. Because today's world is not just done in your back shed, in a Wallace and Gromit model, for those of you who remember that, those cartoons. They made the wrong trousers after all. It's done in collaboration. Innovation today is a global collaborative effort. And in all our countries, we're seeking to encourage small companies, research communities, our academics, our brilliant geniuses to come up with new innovations that will stimulate the economy and deliver exports and growth. And to do that, it's not just about protecting your idea through intellectual property tools, patents, and copyright. You must share your ideas with others, with other collaborators, other countries, future manufacturers, your regulatory bodies, your academics. You have to share. But you do that in a measured way. If you just publish it on the internet, somebody else will perhaps take it or rubbish it. And the way that we do this is through the medium of standards. So you may have thought of standards as just something to do with product quality and the safety of bottled water. And of course it is. But actually, in today's world, the world of standards that we use to advise our government on is the use of structured knowledge to help governments deliver innovation, to deliver emerging technologies and new ideas in your country or indeed across the globe. So we are working here in the UK in a range of areas that are very, very far upstream in the world of business and industry, but will gradually become huge new industries for the world. Areas like offshore wind, which you have seen a lot about, or the problem of assisted living for the elderly. As we have an increasingly aging population, how can we create new products and services that make that experience more comfortable? Cell therapy, regenerative medicine, or indeed, as Michaela kindly invited me to talk about, synthetic biology. Now, I'm not here to lecture about it, but just to illustrate. I use this concept to illustrate what
Could
we
you say
mean.
in a few words, what is synthetic biology?
Well,
Where the Prime Minister asked you what it is.
synthetic biology is the making of biological elements, building blocks, a bit like children's toys, that you can assemble into some form to do something you want it to do.
What is it good for?
It will become part of our manufacturing process. So using biological tools to do things in manufacturing that historically we might have used metal tools to do. So we're stitching in biological building blocks, molecules that do a particular job. And you have many examples you already know about. So you talk about engineers designing lubricants for engines. They're designing a chemical to do a job. You talk about engineers designing a bridge. They're using concrete and steel to cross a gap. You talk about biological engineers designing a biological product to do a job, maybe for farming, or maybe for the chemical sector, or maybe to keep your windows clean, self-cleaning glass. So lots of ideas around where this will go, but it will become a global industry. And the use of the standards process, the partnering arrangement, the stakeholder engagement is fundamental to delivering innovation. You cannot do it on your own. You have to explain and talk through your ideas with your stakeholders, your future customers, your users, and so on. And we do this through the standards vehicle. So cyber security, smart cities and future cities, energy management, water management, emerging technologies, all of these are areas where best practice knowledge needs to be captured through the standards route. You can imagine that as people shape up a new technology, like synthetic biology, that we're not very familiar with, one of the issues is public acceptability. One of the issues is, what does it mean? And one of the first things you need to do is to agree the definitions of the language that you're using to describe your new invention before you can turn it into an innovation. So we go through a process of helping those communities with bright new ideas in synthetic biology write down what they're talking about. If they write down what they're talking about, they can help investors build confidence in their research. Very important to win funding, you need to have investor confidence. Investors have no confidence if they don't understand what you're talking about. So the terminology and the language is an area that's often used. In the case of synthetic biology, the definition of those building blocks. A famous Danish children's toy Lego, you'll think of that as an image of what I mean here. So how do you design the shape of those blocks in a way that people can exploit them around the world? If they're a different size, they won't plug in to your customer's factory, wherever that is. Metrology is an area that's very important in innovation. So if you're coming up with a new science, you want to convert it to a new product, how do you measure what you're doing? How do you characterize the products that you're talking about? And in this modern world, the issue around open innovation and responsible behaviors, open access to data, become ever more important. There are examples on the web today where you can post your question, and people all over the world will try and answer it. And big companies are using this very successfully to get questions answered very quickly by people who go home at night. They want to spend their evenings answering other people's questions, perhaps even your competitor who's put the question up because confidentially they want this answered. So all sorts of areas around here where we need, I'm not going to say rules, but we need best practice. Because what we're talking about here for innovators is a ladder of opportunity to reach the market more quickly, to reach it with more confidence, to help keep that investment process going, and to make sure that as you carry on that journey, your regulators, your future customers, your future suppliers and manufacturers understand what you're doing and are willing to help you on that journey. It's not a one person show anymore. It's all about sharing. So we see standards in BSI as an essential element of delivering innovation in the UK, and indeed in helping other countries who want to take advantage of those ideas. We see standards as complementary to intellectual property. They're the flip side of the IP coin. And indeed, when your countries are helping train people in intellectual property, they should also be helping to train them in the use of standards to deliver innovation. And of course, as in all our countries, our regulators love to use what's in standards to support their regulatory structures. That's fine, that's great, but let's not let that get in the way, because they're writing law and we're writing opportunity. So we try very carefully in this space to help governments understand the difference between writing regulation that is there to protect people and protect the environment, and drafting standards to help innovators deliver these new technologies and deliver jobs and growth. So that's the contribution. Do you want? Thank you, Michael.
I think Scott. Yes, Scott was my partner, Colin David. BSI is member of the group, so that's very good. Recently they joined us. That means
very happy, proud to be here.
They will, but just maybe to enhance the further what you mentioned about standards and language and new frameworks. Carl, you want to come here because you mentioned open innovation, open access, open. Maybe you don't go too far. Carl, can you come in?
Yes, that was a link. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Can I say first of all how thrilled I am to be here? It's a rare privilege to talk to such a senior and distinguished audience, and I'm very proud to be a part of this. I am from, especially a think tank event actually, because I am from a think tank. I'm from a British political think tank, actually established 20 years ago by Jeff Morgan, an absolutely scarily clever man who you'll meet tomorrow. Set up to try and help and do research to inform the kind of British political and public response to serious political and social issues. And I'm here really, I'm kind of shoehorned really into this session, right at the end. I'm here to talk about not only a very successful innovation, but also a very disruptive one. It's disruptive because it's changing the social networks, which completely govern who we are and govern our lives and how we are governed, and that is social media. We set up at Demos a year ago now the Centre for the Analysis of Social Media, to think through both how we can use social media to understand people and also to understand how social media is changing that society itself. So with your blessing, I'd like to very, very quickly, in only 10 minutes, kind of at a fair gallop, go through 5 top level observations about how social media is changing society. So, first of all, the social media revolution. We have lived through a revolution in where and how we live our lives. 1.2 billion of us have now radically, in just a space of a few years, moved our lives onto digital social platforms. The UK actually has a high proportion of social media users than any other country in the world, quickly followed by the United States, China, Russia, Brazil, and Africa is poised for social media to absolutely explode. In the next 2 years, the social media penetration in Africa will look completely different to it is today. It's at the moment sitting somewhere between 5 and 15%, and 30% if you look in North Africa like Morocco, 15% if you look at Egypt, 5% if you look at Ghana. But there's now 400 million mobile phone users in Africa. And with broadband connectivity getting cheaper and cheaper, we're going to see a radically swift uptake in social media on that continent too. And it's important really to understand how this is kind of going to change society and change the way in which we all live. So I want to bring to 5 vocal observations about how it's changed life in the UK and in Western Europe where it kind of first took hold. The first kind of vital, crucial change is in how politics work. It is absolutely revolutionising the day-to-day operation of politics. Social media we see evolving in front of our very eyes is changing from a kind of a forum of debate about music and religion to be an incredibly important space for kind of digital political activism. New groups are springing up, from Beppe Grillo in Italy. You might have heard Beppe Grillo came out of nowhere. You know, he was a comedian, and then a year later he was successfully fighting an electoral battle in Italy. The English Defence League, a party you might have seen has gained some visibility here in the UK, is essentially a Facebook group with a street-based wing. Time and time again, we see new kind of groups, maybe single-issue groups, maybe groups of kind of internationalising their concerns in new ways, spring up new alliances, all now exploding on social media. That's point one. So new groups, new ways of identifying with these groups. We increasingly see people who are using social media to have different kinds of political identities. They relate to political groups in different ways. In the whole of Western Europe, we've seen formal party membership go down. We've seen electoral turnout go down. We've seen donations to political parties go down. On the other hand, we have seen millions of people adopt this kind of more fluid, more porous relationship with political parties. Now, 1 million people are in some way kind of like or are friends of the English Defence League. You know, this is kind of sits somewhere between formal party membership and this kind of looser kind of affiliation with the group. It doesn't require you to sign up to kind of to kind of take the orders of formal hierarchy. It doesn't require you to pay political dues. What it does do is in some way relate you to a political project in a new way, which we're still trying to seek to understand. Also, the other kind of issue about politics is that it's levelling the playing field in a way which we're seeing powerfully realised. You know, not 2 decades ago, there were monopolies of communication in the press and in politics and in government, which have been absolutely exploded. This is allowing kind of these kind of insurgent grassroots movements to kind of gain audiences and cachets and constituencies like what we've never seen before. And that brings me on to point number 2. So it's not only changing politics, it's also changing beliefs. The gatekeepers which used to sit between us and the information we received have been levelled by this kind of deluge of kind of user-generated content. The kind of anthologist, the book editor, the academic, the newspaper editor, they are no longer sitting between us and the information that we receive. But what has kind of risen up as a kind of new kind of gatekeeper are the social networks that we surround ourselves on in social media. And that is changing the way, the kind of information which we receive and how we form beliefs on the basis of that information. What we're seeing happening are these homophilic networks rising up. You tend to associate with people who are quite similar to you. You tend to also do that on social media. So you surround yourself with what academic calls invisible autopropaganda. This is that the people that are quite similar to you on social media now heavily mediate the kind of information that you receive. The effect of this is that we now have echo chambers. We have Republicans, we have Democrats, we have conspiracy theorists, all of whom are kind of surrounded by relatively like-minded fellow travellers, which create an information universe of essentially one opinion. And that opinion might not absolutely be the truthful opinion, but within these certain echo chambers, they harden into a kind of like received conventional wisdom. Now, this is kind of like evoking a kind of group, what we call group extremity shift. It's really powerful, so it's kind of social psychological phenomenon wherein you get 20 Democrats in a room and 20 Republicans, or really of any political hue, and you get them to all talk Democrat politics or Republican politics, they all tend to end up more Democrat or Republican than they were in the first place. Incredibly powerful. We see this becoming more and more important online. And one of the most important ways in which it's happening is in conspiracy theories. Actually, Cambridge, I realised the other day, has set up a whole new centre. It's a probably worthwhile one, studying conspiracy theories. Incredibly important, because we've seen an absolutely blooming of the kind of conspiracist mindset, largely driven by the kind of echo chamber architecture of social media networks. So that's number 2, beliefs. Number 3, academia. We're sitting on the cusp now of the kind of blooming of a whole new academic discipline. So I don't quite know what it's going to be called, so call it social media science. This is based on the insight that in transporting your lives onto these kind of digital commons or kind of digital social platforms, we've now created more information about ourselves than we ever have had in the past. This is the datafication of human life. We have never had the kind of like digital visage of a whole society in motion arguing, condemning, joking, falling in love than we've ever had before. This is an incredibly exciting prospect, I think, for the entire humanities. And we're seeing in the UK, and some other places in Europe, there's kind of a very strong kind of research strategic pivot towards supporting the growth of a kind of muscular, empirical new discipline, which is going to try and understand and use this information. And it will be doing so by employing all these. So the other revolution, which has gone on kind of underneath this, is the big data revolution, which I don't have really time to touch on. But it's the growth of a whole suite of new tools which are capable of dealing with the data and the kind of complexity and at the speed in which it arrives that we now see in social media. This kind of social media science will be in some sense the kind of marshalling or kind of domesticating of these big data tools, algorithms, analytics, automated scraping, data visualizations within a kind of social science frame. And this will be, I think, an incredibly powerful kind of new empirical effort to try and understand how humanity works. The Economic and Social Research Council, which is one of our kind of main governmental funding bodies here in the UK, is going to announce, really any day now, it should have been already, a major multi-10 million pound support for the growth of this new discipline. And I can really see that having knock-on consequences throughout academia, elsewhere in the world too. They actually initially intended it to be the International Centre for Social Media Research, and then there's kind of the various international collaborators dropped away, so that's the Centre for International Social Media Research. A neat semantic pivot there. So that's academia. So law and order. Social media, as we kind of transport our lives on social media, we transport all parts of our lives, both the good and the bad, the law-abiding and the illegal. So we've seen the creation of two new things. First, or two new phenomena, really. First, the emergence of new kinds of crimes. So whether it's cyberbullying or trolling or various kinds of digitally born hate crime, we've seen them emerge on social media in a powerful new way, which requires a legal response, which we're still trying to work through at the moment. We've had a big problem in the UK we're trying to draw the lines about how you deal with inappropriate language and kind of confrontations and threats online. It's also a new forum for old crimes. We've seen Facebook used to hire hitmen, to steal identities, to launder money. You might Bitcoin and the Silk Road. You may have heard of all this. These are all new forums wherein old crimes are being reproduced in new ways. They're taking on new faces and new guises, new modus operandi, in order to do essentially what has always been done. This is lodging an enormous kind of enforcement responsibility on the police and on security. And they are absolutely struggling to deal with the questions about capability. So how on earth do we understand all this data? People are throwing huge amounts of data at us. Some of it might be evidence, some of it might be pertinent and relevant and vital to an investigation, and there's no way we can tell the difference between that and the delusional nonsense which is also being thrown at us. And also, how do we police these new online social spaces? Do we actually literally patrol them? I mean, this is inspiring another issue, the ethics of this all, which is exactly where is the kind of public acceptability lie with these online social spaces. Oh, sorry. So this is kind of like the internet has kind of existed throughout the 1970s today. There's been this kind of powerful kind of like cyber utopian kind of philosophy which is underwritten it. If you go back and you read the kind of like missives of the Electronic Frontiers Foundation, the early progenitors of the internet, it's all about the creation of a new way of organising beyond the nation-state level. You know, it's welcome to the internet, the home of mind. You know, where nation-states, you are not welcome here. And in this kind of sense of progress or teleology, where we were going to go beyond our current mode of organising, they're hardened this strong conception, and this is really deeply held by many of the people both creating the technologies and the habits which we see on the internet today, including many of our billionaires in Silicon Valley, that the internet and social media especially are absolutely not places where nation states can tread. They're absolutely not places where conventional law enforcement and intelligence can do their daily work. We've seen bruising political debates both here in the UK and in the US over exactly where and how we can create powers to allow intelligence services and law enforcement to collect information on social media. And you might have seen the kind of Stopper and Pipper, like the kind of Blackout Days, or Wikipedia and many other kind of major internet service providers stop providing what they were doing in order to, and we're going to see this happen more and more, these continuous flashpoints where we're seeing a battle being fought about exactly where the line is drawn between state power and this new body. And we haven't got there yet either, actually, in the UK. There was tremendous debate. The police, I think, is treating this very seriously and trying to build up kind of capability in this area in order to try and leverage all this. And this brings me on to my fifth and final point, which is not only have we seen a kind of new crimes, new academia, new politics, we're also now seeing a new kind of intelligence. So the growth of social media has kind of caused SOCMINT, social media intelligence, to for the first time really obviously look like it can pay us real dividends to public security. It might be used as evidence. You can leverage all these new technologies, big data technologies, try and gain insight into social movements, to gain insight into how groups act. You can even use it, and we're now, this is the kind of golden holy grail really of big data analytics work, and the kind of entry of all these new methodologies into this new space is prediction. And there is now the kind of very much the kind of like this kind of blooming idea that we can begin to anticipate not only crime but lots of other social phenomena much more than we ever have before. And here, as in everywhere else, this poses a number of different challenges. It poses a capability challenge. How on earth do you do all this stuff? Most of the kind of expertise to understand social media and to leverage these new technologies sits out of government. So in terms of actually identifying an area where we actually desperately need kind of public science advice and innovation is absolutely in this new exciting area. And it also poses legal challenges. All the all the legal framework for trying to govern how social media, how intelligence work operates, how you can tie it to the principles of proportionality and necessity, were all drawn up before social media or the internet really were ever existent. This is an absolutely massive problem.
So what you're saying is, and I'll get Andrew to probably bring in, we were trying to bring in the issue of cybersecurity, of open data, open access, open everything, but while still collaborating and sharing, while still being safe. Yeah? And the question was, is there a framework that we could use on how to think about it? Because at the moment, what you're saying is there isn't yet a framework. Yeah? So shall we leave it to that, or shall we say that we recognize that we need to develop a framework on how to deal with the issues related to security? Yeah? I'll bring in Andrew after that.
Okay, we absolutely cannot leave it with having a framework. This is one of the most important and inflammatory civil liberties debates which we're currently having. Now, we don't have one. I think that the government probably is in the next couple of years in the UK going to go back to kind of like primary statute to actually try and draw up new law in this. There's debates about the extent to which you can kind of like warp and mangle the old laws to suit the new terrains, which personally I think is kind of totally unrealistic. But no, I think in many ways. So this is the other thing. Although I've tried to like draw a parcel around in a way and try and wrap all the different ways in which social media is changing society from a UK-centric position, but to say that this is happening everywhere. And it's going to happen in the countries that currently aren't using social media very much. And all of these issues are massively internationalising. These are challenging all of our ideas about, in many ways, as the creators intended it to, challenging ideas about where the nation state starts and stops. All of these things are international jurisdictional issues. So in my own experience, I'm not a governmental person. We are not engaged in an international network in trying to think through these issues, and that absolutely needs to exist. It absolutely needs to exist. Otherwise, there is no state. There is no. The solution does not begin and end with our border.
Is it a way a level playing field, because we don't know anywhere how to deal with that issue? We just need to start.
Well, level or not, the playing field is the world.
Is the world. Andrew, just.
I'll just stay here because I'm trying to say something, but it'll be very brief because it's been a long afternoon. I want to sort of look back into some things which Carl wasn't here this morning, but we were talking about values and how smart partnership can help. And I just want to say very briefly,
In Britain, every good story should follow the Agatha Christie pattern of the case of, you know. So I just want to say, it's the case of the German Chancellor's telephone. And if you watch the whole debate that's grown up around that, there are really two camps. You might call them the Vice President Dick Cheney camp and the Edward Snowden camp. But you know, the Edward Snowden camp includes the Guardian, the journalistic world out of which I came, the Free Commons and all that. And the other camp includes people, the military, security, intelligence, lobby, and so on. I don't want to get into who's right or who's wrong, because actually, this is where the smart comes in. Because you talked very well, Carl, about the echo chamber. As these networks build up, we have networks, we have other networks, and then we have complete anti-networks, like the book which you'll know, We Are Anonymous, the people who are the hackers. You know, so you have all sorts of networks. And the echo chamber effect, which you referred to, makes everyone more extreme. So there's nothing in common, apparently, between the people who say every phone must be tapped. I am the United States of America. I have enough hammers to hit every nail in the world. So rather than waste these hammers, I will hit every nail in the world. I must quote the statistic which I've been throwing around, which is that the world's spending on defense is $1.7 trillion, of which Russia only spends 60 billion, China 90, and America spends 868 billion. So half of the entire world's spending on defense, more than the next 12 nations combined, is spent by America. If you convert that into intelligence security terms, they must have so much gear that really they are people who have so many hammers, they must be looking for nails to hit. Now, I'm not taking a view about what's right or wrong, because one person's protection is another person's intrusion, and one person's regime of freedom is another person's regime of license and chaos. I'm just saying that as smart partners, we ought to try and find a middle way, try to break down these constituencies which appear to be ranged like armies against each other. And that's all I really want to say, is to say that at the end of this discussion, where we've talked about innovation, technology, enterprise, and enormous forces built up, rather than enjoying watching the battle, we ought to be saying, how can we participate in a constructive way to try and bring people together, rather than having the lines and the boundaries between the networks artificially strengthened. That's all I wanted to say.
Managing live webcast on time. So quick one, time.
Very quick one. Yeah, I mean that is one of the absolutely vital challenges which we all face. And in my opinion, we need a new construct of digital citizenship. Then we have to find ways of breaking down the barriers, or at least treating each other decently online. Now, if you talk about Anonymous, if you go to 4chan, which is the kind of like the forum where Anonymous came out of, it is an immoral space. You know, where there is actually, you go on there.
Immoral.
Immoral. It's in many ways totally morally bankrupt. There's all this. The internet is kind of culturally a place which values freedom so much. It's forgotten that there is also responsibility there too, and that you cannot treat everyone else as you want. You know, behind the anonymity, behind the immediacy of doing it, behind all these various ways in which the internet is set up to guide us to treat each other in horrible ways. I think we do need a kind of global digital citizenship. We need to teach people, everyone, that what you do has consequences online, and that you need to treat people online in many ways as you treat them offline, which is courtesy and decency. I think there has to be some kind of thinking to move in that direction. Otherwise, we're going to see this kind of like very dangerous kind of counter-colonisation of online norms into offline spaces, which I think is, if not managed correctly and within the framework of responsibility and trust and decency and mutuality, it's going to be an incredibly damaging kind of cultural insertion in the years to come.
But I just want to say, it's also a very important educational task. Because when a particular incident crops up, though we have lots of things in common, what happens is that people fall on one side or the other of the issue in deciding whether or not it is right to tap Angela Merkel's phone, and there are arguments both ways. What we need to do is to build what I say the common language of digital citizenship, so that at moments when there are difficult issues to face, we're all, as it were, smart. We're all together. We say, even if we start to disagree on this point, we have an awful lot
that we agree on along the lines that you were just saying.
Deputy Prime Minister, were you now to have an advisor on this kind of issues, what did you immediately ask?
No,
No, that is
no, my immediate question will be whether social media is doing more damage than benefiting humanity. You see, I listened carefully. Let me tell you a story. It is true that there is the playing field is being leveled. And when people talk about the leveling on the playing field, they always talk about politicians, elections. Now, the other time I was in Indonesia and I met a lady from the Netherlands. And we were talking about elections with a colleague from Zambia. He was then the Minister of Finance. And the lady told us, look, you people have still got democracy. I asked her, but what do you mean? She said, but ours is no more democracy, democracy. Because even trees and dogs are represented, and animals are represented in parliament. And of course, you see, when I listen to the story of social media, and when I look at what is happening, I realize that in actual fact, in terms of politics and otherwise, we are not leveling the playing field, because a very good leader can be brought down by an individual without no good reason. In the social media, if they want you to go down, you will go down. There's absolutely nothing you can do. So
is that an immoral?
I think that is what he terms immoral. In my view, that is immoral. We have experience at home where individuals will attack somebody without no good reason on what they call Facebook and so on. And when they are confronted, they just say, I'm sorry. Then it ends. But your name have gone throughout the world as a very bad person. Now I agree that I believe that we need, and there is no way you can control this system. It's a good thing that people are free to participate in the social media. But once you have got the system destroyed, there's no way you can build it with a social media. It gets destroyed and it is left to those who have who have not participated in the destruction to build it up. You can take examples, many examples. But of course, I don't know, this technology. You see, we are spending money on new every 6 months. There's a new cell phone. You spend a little bit more, and the other one brings a new iPad. It's a little bit smaller. You spend a higher amount of money. So you go on. Where are we going to end? So we cannot control it. In actual fact, where we are heading to is to become slaves of our own technology creation. That's where we are heading to. But of course, if it is possible for us to do exactly what he said, in terms of creating mechanisms to, not to control, but to manage the situation, it will be good. If we don't, I don't know where we are going to end.
DPM, we were talking over lunch. You were in liberation movement. There were no these gadgets to watch what you're doing. Today there is everything open. Would there still be a liberation movement possible?
No, definitely not. I want to tell you it will not. Now, at the other time we were talking about leaks in institutions, high institutions of decision making, both from the political parties and from the government. And I told my colleagues that every time we talk, we are the same people. But then, after the meeting, you have got these leaks. Now we don't know apparently that these cell phones, when you talk, could be tapped in by somebody outside. And the last one, Michaela, that I want to tell you is when this issue of the American tapping their colleagues in Europe, now we were discussing this thing. How do we keep our information secret? Now we all agreed that if they are able to tap secret information from Germany and Britain, what about us? We should not even bother about it. You see, so we are just playing tools in echo.
What do you think the Deputy Prime Minister should bother about this phone?
The question of is social media allowing us to throw off the yoke of kind of despotic governments, I think, is really contested. But you can clearly see how it is also helping. I mean, the Arab Spring is in some sense driven by the ability of people to coordinate with other people who are also trying to liberate themselves right now. That it happened it's happening in Syria now, and it happened in Egypt.
So you could argue that the Arab Spring wasn't an undisputed benefit.
No, absolutely, I'm not. And there are as many. I'm not evangelizing social media at all. It's got many bad effects as well as good effects. I'm arguing that you can't turn back the clock. People are going to be using social media.
Ask me just to respond on that, just briefly. You see, this morning we talked about the link of government systems to cultural beliefs and cultural ways of doing things. And that is very, very important. It's very, very, very important. Now, I'm not saying the Arab Spring did not bring a benefit to the people. But I'm telling you the truth that the Arab Spring does not differ from Iraq. It doesn't differ from Iraq. You know, the death of what we wanted, only one man, have cost 500 or more than 500. It may go to 1 million people. Now, it is important for us to know that systems, the changing of systems, should not be forced by the will of individuals. It should be linked to institutional beliefs and cultural beliefs to come gradually. I can give you our kingdoms in Southern Africa. Our kingdoms are not like other kingdoms. The kingdoms are adapting to systems that some people may not understand.
That's the point.
But these are changes in the benefit of people. The Arab Spring, I think, and Europe should at least realize that, will be more destructive in the future. Now look at Egypt. What do you want? An elected president? Now he's standing in court. He's in prison.
2 of them.
Yeah, 2 of them. You see, why don't you wait until there is time to change the leadership? If you elected that leader, and that is the principle of democracy, wait until there's elections and bring down, and that's what Obama said recently. Don't break it. Don't break it. Argue your case in election, win election, and then take over. And then you can implement your policy. Now, honestly speaking, if I live after 15 years and we meet, I hope I will, you will tell me a different story from the Arab Spring. We have changed a system that does not tally with the culture, that does not tell with the culture of governance in those areas, and it is going to bring more death.
I think I'm going to use this drop. I know Henry has something to say quick, and then we move on.
I really wanted to make just 2 points, but in view of time, I can even make it 1.5 points. This is the first point. If you look at the heading, we are talking about inclusion, institutions and networks, science, advice, technology, public security, new insights. leveraging technology. Oh my God, it's a whole story. And we have discussed this afternoon, we have picked a number of points, but I feel personally that there is one major important item, particularly for developing countries. What we really need to address is to make sure that all our institutions, government, universities, standards, bureaus, and what have you, are structured in a manner and function in a manner that is more or less acceptable internationally. You don't want government which don't have rule of law. You don't want standards which when you go they don't know how to test those standards, but you say we have one. Or you claim to have a bank, but the bank doesn't know how to send the money to another country. We should not think too much in terms of numbers, but really in terms of minimum institutions that function internationally. You have heard that innovation is, much of it is through collaborative effort globally. You need those institutions in our places to be able to run at that path, even though they are fewer. That's, in my view, the major priority that our governments really need to address. The second point, and I would say half of this, because it's addressing Omar. For us to talk about science advice or the science and technology sector, and not to come with any explicit, clear position of which mandate should be handled by one, I think we need to have some kind of clear position on this. How do we handle the science and technology sector? Both administratively, that means you may have a ministry and an advisor for science and technology, and functionally, what are their roles? I hope that tonight you can think about it. I thank you.
Bring the 3D printer. Follow the program. Anything missing before we go to 3D? The guru on science advice unfortunately has gone. There is a book called Future Direction for Science Advice in Whitehall, which is very new. I got a copy from Kathy in Tanzania. If I read that book in 1984, I would not have accepted a job as a science advisor. I wouldn't. Because I think science advice in a developed country is very, very different from science advice which is required in our developing countries. I wanted to say that in front of David, but you didn't let me. Let me go. You see, we are not dealing with issues that need long debates. We are talking about leaders who want to do things and not talk. Leaders who are doers, they need advice. It is not so much giving him advice, it is actually to be the bridge between him and the scientific community, is for you to provide the information that he requires, and sometimes to be the arbiter when there are too many conflicting ideas. That's what it is. Not all these things that complicated thing about which is right, which is whatever thing that take years for science to settle. That's not science advice in a sense. And about whether social media is correct, that's not science advisor's job either. That's not. So I wanted to say that, because we are talking about science advice for our developing economies. The developed countries have got different issues. So please take that away with you. Number one. Number two.
Now hold a second. We just heard that due to the pervasiveness of technology of a particular type, the one that we don't want to talk about, the one which allows intelligence and security in each country, developing, undeveloped, or super developed, there are the same problems. And are you saying that were you to be science advisor today to Dr. Mahathir, if he was to be today Prime Minister, you wouldn't be asked by him to say, well, how do I deal with this?
Yeah, but
you can't say that.
Not to be involved in developing values and all this kind of philosophical
those are the concerns in
which
this
developed
context.
countries can deal with, but not developing countries.
No, but
there are issues that needs to be tackled very quickly.
Yes.
That's the kind of advice that I was talking about. Okay, let's leave that. That's what I feel. Yeah. And then I want to disagree with
Deputy Prime Minister will tell us what
Yan Balu, because innovation by definition cannot fail. I read the definition from SRI from SRI in America. Wait. Innovation is the creation of new customer value. It creates new customer value in a marketplace with sustainable business models for enterprise producing it. In other words, if it is not that, it is not an innovation. It's still just an invention. This is why I introduced the word pre-innovation. When you have an innovation that you have gone through all the processes and it is ready to be commercialized, it is pre-innovation. It is whether it is going to be successful and become innovation, you don't know yet. But if it is successful, then it is on innovation. That's just my contribution to this debate about innovation. Thank you very much.
There is the Cyber Security Institute, isn't it, in Malaysia, whom all of us in the developing, we benefited by visiting it. You wouldn't be able to visit GCHQ here as easily as we had access to the Cyber Security Institute. Now, the Cyber Security Institute in Malaysia is now part of Ministry of Science Technologies. I'm sure the science advisor has to do something about it, in addition to the intelligence services and security and defense in the country. But that being said, 3D printing, what about that?
What about 3D printing? Thank
Is
you.
3D printing or 3D making? We'll debate.
We'll debate that later. So yes.
It's a continuation of the last one.
Dear ministers, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me today to talk to you a little bit about 3D printing. Obviously, to talk to you about 3D printing, I would need to have at least a 3D printer, or maybe many, or at least some 3D printed objects to show you, which I don't have today. But I will just cover it.
But you are inviting us to your place.
Some of you I recognize. I've seen you. You came to my place in August, so you have seen all the machines and all the objects that we are currently doing. For others, you will just use your imagination. I will first.
But we are welcome to you.
And you're welcome to come to our store, which is in London, next to here in
the city.
Farringdon, not very far. So first, I will give you some insight. I suspect all of you have heard and read and seen about 3D printing because it's so hyped these days. But I'm not sure if many of you have a real knowledge and have touched it for yourself. So let me first cover a little bit of what it is, and then I will cover what it is not.
But you're the founder and the owner.
I'm the founder and owner of a company which is the largest retailer for 3D printers in Europe and possibly worldwide, but at least Europe.
It's called iMaker, not 3D printing.
I did not want to make so much publicity for myself, but yes, if you invite me to do so, my company is called iMaker, like I-M-A-K-R, and the reason we call it iMaker is because I, not like Apple, iPhone, but I like me, I am maker. I make things, because these days we call it 3D printing, but in my opinion, that's very little to do with printing. It's more about making, creating things. So iMaker is the name of my company. So back to it. 3D printing can do a lot. First thing, 3D printing is not new. Many people believe it's a new technology. It is not. 3D printing has been invented in 1960, which is like 50 years ago, right? Invented. And then it has been a reality, working something, functioning, from 81, 82, 83, you know, depending the technologies and where you start from. And already in 90, BMW, the famous car maker in Germany, bought their first 2 machines for 1 million Deutsche Mark at the time for their factories. So it's not new. The new thing, just to let you know, is that the price has gone down, hence people think about it for themselves. Then they realize more what that could do. Many people try to innovate with this. Then journalists come to it and see things, so they talk about it, and then it goes more and more in the hype. But it is not new. The truth is that today you can actually buy a 3D printer that would actually work, like print things for real, for let's say roughly £1,000, anywhere between 500 and 2,000 if you like. So let's say 1,000 to make it simple. And these machines, at the moment, are capable of printing with a very good quality and a very good accuracy, mainly in plastic. ABS, PLA. ABS, a plastic made of oil. PLA, a plastic made of starch, maize, corn. And although plastic is quite limited in terms of material, a lot of things that are around ourselves is made in plastic, which means you can still do a lot of things, but not everything. That's for affordable printers. If you don't limit yourself to affordable printers, if you look into whatever 3D printing is, then you can already print pretty much anything. But the printers cost anywhere between 1,000 and 1 million, to make it simple. Typically, you can print in metal. A small metal 3D printer would cost you somewhere around 250,000. It would be that big, the shape construction that size, and you could do some jewelry, some parts, some engineering bits, some functioning, working, real metal. You could do nylon, you could do glass, you could do sand. Sand is one of my preferred because there is an experiment that has been done in the deserts where some people go there with a 3D printer that use only the power of sun to both function and burn the sand, so you don't need material. The material is there. You don't need energy. The energy is there, and you can create pretty much anything made with that. So at the moment, it's more an experiment, but it's very promising. So you could print in anything: metal, glass, sand, plastic, nylon, and even food. Although it makes no sense to print in food, except for sandwich. No, for sandwich it makes very, very much no sense. But it would make only sense for decorative things on top of a wedding cake or something. But you don't need that, do you? Well, you could like that, but you don't need that. Where it makes more sense is where you come to print with living cells, like bodies. So, as you very much know, we know today how to replace a part of your body with the same part of another body. The problem being that most of the time your body will reject it because your body is prepared to accept only itself and not others. So it's very difficult these days to find another person that has exactly the same DNA or whatever like you to make sure it will be accepted. The one that is likely to be accepted is yourself. And the idea here is that if you have, say, your liver is going sick, if you can pick a bit of your liver, which is not sick yet, then multiply that, then use that to create a new liver, and then install that instead of the previous one. Then you will not reject it because it's yours. And
Is this science fiction?
No, this is for real. No, I'm just giving you real examples. And another one which is even easier to realize is the skin. Remember, the skin is the part of the body that reproduces itself quite easily, you know? Easier when the subject is younger and less when it is less young, but if you pick a little bit of your skin somewhere you don't really need it, in the back or somewhere, then you can easily reproduce that in a laboratory. The only thing is the way we reproduce that these days is flat. You would have a large sheet of your skin, and then from there you can create a material that you could 3D print in any shape. And there has been an experiment very successful to recreate an ear for a person that lost it. So you can create an ear that is exactly the same like the other one. You see the shape, you reproduce that symmetry, and you create a functional real ear. This is just example. So that one might be between cosmetic and survival, depending where you take it and where you need it. There is so this is not living cells, but it is still medical. So yes, these are real markets these days, like Crohn's. Crohn's to replace teeth. This is something where actually today I've seen a machine last year, so probably now it's even better, but last year, it was in November, I've seen a machine big like a fridge, costing $300,000, and that machine would be able to produce 5,000 Crohn's per 24 hours. So you can bet that that machine will pay for itself quite quickly, depending the cost of the Crohn's, but the cost of the Crohn's is quite high. Yeah. Another example, which is very important these days, a real market, is the ear aids. Yeah, for people with hearing difficulties. So the idea here is to use standardized electronics, but use 3D printing to get the perfect shape of your exact, accurate ear, so that you have a better comfort and it fits very well for yourself. And this is something I've been said, I did not check it for myself, but I've been said, worldwide there would be already more than 50% of these that are now 3D printed as opposed to any traditional way.
Make your own at home, right?
No. Again, I was saying 3D printing today is anything from cheap to expensive, and when we talk about these things, we are talking expensive stuff. The affordable machine that you can really have at home do mainly
buttons.
Anything from toy, tools, parts, fix, lampshade, interior design, you name it, you can do it, as far as it's still plastic or mixed of plastic. Okay, I don't want to be too long with this. It is super exciting, it is promising, it is probably an innovation. Probably an innovation. At least it is an invention for a couple of years, so it's probably an innovation now. The only question is, where are we going? I suspect this is what you are looking into. Where are we going with this? And does it matter? I mean, is it just a toy for engineers and let them play, or does it matter? So you have already read and you will read tons of things and even crazy things about that. So some people say, wow, that is the new way for us developed countries to gain back our jobs lost to China, because China is just good to mass production, and with 3D printing we will onshore our production, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, if you think about it, just 5 minutes, it makes no sense. Well, not in the short future. 3D printing is not about replacing mass production. 3D printing is about bespoke production. It's about me and myself, my needs now. So it is not going to replace mass production, but it is probably going to challenge mass production. Not replace it, challenge it. And the way to challenge it is because it will change ourselves. It will change our own position as opposed to what we buy. Today we are more and more buyers. So some of us are designers. They are paid for that. They are employed as a product designer in a company, and they design some stuff. And that stuff then is prototyped and then produced, and then produced in mass, and then packed into boxes, and then sent into bulks to retailers. And these guys, they store that in their stores, and then they sell it to people. And then the rest of us, those that are not designers, they are only buyers. You need something, you go in the store and you buy it, which has not always been the case. I mean, in the past, we needed something, we do it. I mean, if you need a tool, you go break a branch of a tree and you make your tool if you need it. And then from there, some people were good at doing that kind of thing, and some others good at doing something else, and then they've been starting exchanging goods between you do that for me, I do this for you. And then from there, we specialized and specialized in more. And now we are today in an extreme situation where we just go buy things, and if you don't like something, you just go buy another one. I think with 3D printing and some general tendency and trends, but 3D printing will accelerate that. We are more going to be able to obviously some of us will be able to create their things, but that's not the majority. But companies will be able to take advantage of 3D printing to kind of specialize, customize things for your needs. And today, mainly when you have a choice for a product is like color and size. So you have that product, and the most you can choose is I would like to choose that color and that size, and that's it. But you cannot choose the shape of it. You cannot, and with 3D printing, because 3D printing is so powerful at bespoke, you will have a chance to see these websites and these vendors and manufacturers offer you more choice. And instead of just color and size, you say glasses, for example, instead of just, today you don't have choice with glasses. You have just a choice between products, but you can't really choose anything about the glass except maybe the lenses, perhaps the colors, and that's it. In the future, you will be able probably to say, okay, my face is that size here, and my nose is that shape. And not only that size, but also that shape. Because we know that Asian people, they have a very different shape of nose as opposed to a European and as opposed to African, and there are differences. And so the shape of this part of the glass, I like this frame, I like this style, I just want it to fit me. So I would be able in some way to give my size and my dimension and got something made for me. And this is just an example, but that will be for everything. I go buy furnitures, I like that piece of furniture, but I would like the handle to be not only my color, but my shape, and today, so I'm not saying, and nobody believes, that you're going to 3D print furniture. It makes no sense to go 3D print some cupboard, because it's big, because the cheapest way to make some furniture is to use wood, either plain wood or processed wood. So IKEA is good for long. I mean, you still go in our countries to IKEA to buy furniture, but handles, corners, and some bits inside of some things, that makes sense. And today, if you go to IKEA buy some furniture, they offer you a choice between 5 or 6 different handles, no more, because if they would like to offer you 30 or 50, but they need to stock them all. It's expensive, they will not sell that many. So this is where we are going to see things. And the other thing that we are going to see is, again, new jobs. Because these days, this is very important to see that, because sometimes I demonstrate some of our 3D printed objects which come out of the printer, they are assembled, they are moving, they are functioning, and they have not been assembled. They come out of the printer as is, finished, although they can open and close and move around. They function, they've not been assembled. Some people tell me, wow, this is bad because this will suppress the job of the person that used to assemble things. That's perhaps true. But at the same time, you're going to have more jobs for people to design, think, create. And all of us, with different with differences obviously between countries, but all of us, we tend to push our population, our young people, more and more to schools. And then we reach a point where you have tons of pupils coming out of school with a certain degree, a certain knowledge, and they can't find a job to match that what they've learned. And then, to make it simple, you have done 5 or 6 years of study and you go sell food in a McDonald's because you could not find a job matching your expertise. And I think with 3D printing, we are raising the level of the jobs that are involved in there, not only to improve the printers themselves, but also to create new objects. And obviously, in the future, it will be more and more a job to design and sell a design, as opposed to create an object and sell the object, which will obviously raise interesting questions, especially for countries, in terms of, let's say, taxes. Because today it's quite easy, well, not always obvious, but at least easy, to say, okay, goods enter my country, goods go out my country, I take a tax when it enters and when it goes out. But what if the file enter my country and things are created in my country, but the design comes from somewhere else? How and where do I take my tax to make my country sustain? which is an important subject. Another one being, obviously, if I create a beautiful design which is very clever, makes sense, and I sell it to one person, and that person told me they would just make one, but in fact they make 1 million. Raise tons of questions, and all these questions are very interesting to discuss, and they create opportunity to create new jobs, because there is a job which is thinking, developing, creating software around this. Then another question would be, who will benefit that? Is it only the developed countries that will benefit that because they are already a bit in advance on that? If I look today what the printers that we are selling at iMaker, where do they come from? Mainly from the US. We've got maybe 12, 15 different brands that we resell. 3 of them are from the US, MakerBot, Solidoodle, and Cubify. 1 from the UK here, used to be Bits for Bytes, now they are called Cubex. And 1 from Netherlands, which is Ultimaker. There are quite a couple in Germany and in Netherlands which we're not partner of, but they are there. And the other one, they are from China, say FlashForge and Plus and Mini and that kind of machines. I've not seen any from Africa yet. I've not seen any from South America yet, although they are, I know, but maybe not at the level where they sell that to us.
Japan? No?
Surprisingly, not that many from Japan. Surprisingly, not that many from Japan.
India?
I don't know.
India, I've got some people coming to me and saying, okay, we are preparing something. Do you want to resell us when we are ready? But I've not. Yes, I've bought 1 from India, but I must say I did not keep it to sell. But yes, anyway. So because we have like 12 or 15 that we sell, but we have received like maybe 50 that we have not decided to keep. You know, obviously. So okay. So well, let me summarize that because we don't want to spend the whole day on that. 3D printing is very, very promising. 3D printing is today so hyped that there are quite many wrong ideas coming around that, and it's not that easy to kind of sort what is true and false in there. And that's it pretty much. So we are happy to help people find out. So we do mainly sell printers and also services around that, like including training, and we provide files. We design in 3D, we print for people, and we do a little bit of consulting. So sometimes people from many companies, but it could also be a country coming to us and asking, okay, what is in my particular situation, in my company, in my country, what should I do, what could we do, what is possible to do around 3D printing? We are happy to help in that matter. So I suspect that you've got my details.
So you're a smart partner, yeah, we do have.
That's it. So if you want me to take a couple of questions, I will not be able to stay forever, but I can take some questions.
Yeah. Any question that you want? Because you wanted to go before.
I think I may ask an ignorant question, but I wanted to go and look tomorrow how you do things before I ask a question, because at present moment really you are speaking from a different planet.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So then I appreciate that, and then I can suggest. So my store, where you were coming, is in Farringdon, but maybe for you it's easier to come at Selfridges, because since we've been quite successful in our store, Selfridges, which you probably know, came to us and asked us to create another store within their premises. So for you, it's much closer from here, it's easier. So main floor, far left, it's called the Wonder Room, and within that they have a concept store, and we are the big part of that concept store. So we have a couple of printers, including one demonstrating all day long, printing things for you to kind of realize how it works. We also have beautiful piece of art in 3D, like beautiful lampshade, the one I was talking about moving like this is brilliant. Beautiful hat, some glasses. Every 3D glasses we have are printed. And the other thing that we have at Selfridges, which is kind of cool and fun, is a 3D booth, which is full size. You jump into it, and there are tons of cameras taking a picture of you at the same time. And then we produce we call it mini you. So we produce your own 3D printed miniature in color, full color. The scanning takes like 2-3 minutes. Well, in fact, it takes 2 seconds.
2 seconds.
And then you wait a minute, and then another one, 2 seconds. Yeah, 3 times to make sure we have one. And after that, it takes 2-3 days for us to produce actually this. And it is full color 3D printed. It's not painted. It's full color 3D printed. If you want to come
The
and
price?
what's
the price? The price?
And the price is very affordable. The price is £159 for a figurine, depending the size.
And you put it on your desk, right?
And we've done a minister of the government here. We've done a member of parliament here. We've done some stars and people like that. And we've done families. They come 5 of them, and they create their own figurines for the family. It's a brilliant gift for the grandmother or that kind of thing. And companies come for corporate gifts as well. What size? Questions?
The German standard.
I'll do it. Give me a question, but I also just wanted to talk about the social media. And I could see it's something that everybody was quite engrossed with. Yeah, I think as developing countries, especially in Africa, the interventions that have come through, the technologies that have come through, like for example the cell phone, the new technologies, have had such a huge impact on our development as Africa. And we've managed to leverage on those and even create new innovations. For example, the payment systems that we're now doing, like M-Pesa from Kenya, and what we're now doing in Zimbabwe. So I just wanted to say, even on social media, I think it's an area that we can look at and see how we can innovate from that, how we can develop further from that, and even create solutions even for the world, because people are still grappling on how to actually tackle it. There are no answers even here on how to utilize everything coming out of social media. So I think it's an area that we can look at and embrace and develop further. And then for him,
what was my question then?
Yeah, I just wanted to know how you are dealing with issues of ethics, because you were talking about now human parts and all that, issues of ethics, issues of standards, and issues of intellectual property.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, just hold a second.
This is
One
3
more
good
question.
questions.
One more question.
Well, I'm going to try to answer the last question, and maybe you can complement, but it's a good illustration of the role of standards to disseminate innovation, to illustrate what Scott was saying, because this is an area where an ISO committee was created 3 or 4 years ago, and it's already active. And compared to the situation 10 years ago, we would have waited to have national standards and then strive to harmonize these standards. Nowadays, to facilitate the international dissemination of technology, we start by working at the international level. So there is an ISO committee which has, in fact, partnered with the ASTM.
Some people don't know ISO.
ISO?
No, ISO, International Standard for Knowledge.
Yeah, but what I wanted to come to is that it is a perfect example of the new way of using standards for disseminating new technologies worldwide. And there is even a joint partnership with ASTM, which is a major American. And usually, in the world before, we would have waited for ASTM to make a standard, for the Europeans to make a standard, for the Chinese to make a standard, and then it would have taken 10 years to harmonize these standards. Now the work is being done directly. And what I wanted to say is that those of your countries, there are 16 countries members of that committee. None is a developing country. But if you are interested in monitoring what is going on internationally, a good way is ask your national standards body to keep an eye on this ISO Technical Committee 261. So I think it's a good example to illustrate what we have been saying before you arrived on the role of international standards to disseminate and transfer technology worldwide. And it's an opportunity for developing countries to catch up if this is of interest to them.
Okay.
Okay, so that was not really a question.
No, it was just answering my colleague from the Standards Institute from Zimbabwe, and but maybe you have an opinion on what I have just said. So that's my question.
Definitely. To be very honest, it's always good when the standard comes earlier rather than later, especially for enterprises trying to innovate or invent. To try to innovate, and then you invest quite a lot in something, and then a standard comes out and it is not what you've done, so you need to adapt everything. So it's better if the standard comes earlier rather than later. And the other thing is, we need standards in terms of 3D printing. Just like give you a very small example, but a very practical level, and probably ISO will not deal with that, but it will come at some point. Today, if you buy a 3D printer from us or from anybody, one that you can have for your home, obviously you need some material to put in there. Usually plastic comes in a roll. And these days, if you buy a MakerBot, MakerBot will tell you that you should use MakerBot filament. Not because they want to sell it for more expensive. Not really. The filament is not very expensive. But for one reason, is because they test their own machine with that filament. They buy that filament, they make their machines, they test them together, and they know it works. And so they recommend you that you buy that filament. Maybe they make $1 per roll on top, but that's not much. And for you, because you don't want to waste your time, you prefer to pay that filament, which is not even more expensive, but roughly a roll of filament that we sell today is around 30 pounds per kilo, maybe 29 or 32, you know, that kind of range. It's not a big deal, except one brand. There is one brand, they sell their filament for the price of gold. But except these, all others, it's roughly the same. And the thing is, you prefer to take this one. And to be honest, it's true that it works better. I mean, if I take a MakerBot and I keep some filament from MakerBot, I have 99% of chance that it will work. And if I take an Ultimaker and I take the filament from Ultimaker, 99%. If I mix them together, well, bad example because Ultimaker is not the same. But again, if we would have some good standards, we could be able to say not buy the filament from MakerBot, but buy the filament ABZ. And ABZ would be a standard, and we know whatever the brand that would fit in there. And the same for the manufacturers. They would be happy to test their filament not from one brand, but from one standard. And that would be better for everybody. So yes, I agree, especially for a young company like us, it would make us our life easier if we would have standard coming earlier. Another one question where we are expecting standards is it food safe? If I 3D print a cup, is it food safe? Me as a retailer, I say, I don't know, take your risk. I've read somewhere that it is safe, but I also read somewhere that it is not. And I don't have the money and the time to invest in making my own controls and tests. So I rely on the filament suppliers, and they have to do the test, and they say it is safe, but they don't have a standard for that. So probably we need some standards and controls and things. At the moment, there is not even a market. It's too tiny. We sell a lot of machines as per what we expected to sell. But to be honest, in terms of the global population, it's still very little. So at the moment, nobody really invested, nor us, nor the government, nobody did really invest to know if it's really, really safe for food, safe for this, safe for that. And it will come sometime.
It's IP.
Then IP. Well, ethics is another one. Ethics, ethics, I don't think it's about the private company doing some technology to interfere with ethics at the same time. It's about people. Like me, as an individual, I have my own ethics as opposed to what I'm doing or not. But in terms of company, it's a different story. And if you start mixing ethics and business, I'm not saying that they should face each other or fight each other, but I also think that they should not kind of interfere. I think it's good that some ethic committee, independently of companies, think about things. Obviously, companies want to participate, give insights, but I would be happy to participate as an individual, but not as my company. I think I keep having that question from journalists and people like, oh, 3D printing, you can make guns.
That's I wanted to.
Guns. It makes my life difficult, this guns thing, because it's not possible to talk about 3D printing to any journalist without that question coming out. Although, to be very honest, if you want to make a gun, there are probably tons of opportunities to do it, and probably 3D printing is one of them, and probably is the most expensive, the less likely to succeed, the most, likely to kill yourself before you kill anybody else. You know? Just like the first man trying to fly, These guys, they thought it would be possible to fly. They were very, very convinced it's possible. So they tried to make some wings, and how many of them died trying? But they were right in a sense, because after a couple of years or decades, it was possible to fly. And nowadays we know exactly how, and we can fly from a country to another country. But the first guys trying, they died. And this idea of 3D printing a gun is very much like that. It's tempting. They like to do it, and they try, and they fail. And sometime, one day, they will succeed. But again, it's much easier to kill somebody with anything else but a 3D printed gun. So for some reason it's exciting for journalists, exciting for people, and they keep talking about that. And you've probably seen recently in the news, it was 1 or 2 weeks ago, that the police broke a house somewhere in Manchester or somewhere, and then they ran into it and they found a 3D printer, probably printing something that could be participating in somewhere in a gun. You've seen that? You've heard that? Me, I heard that because the same day at 2 o'clock I received a call. Hey, here is Channel 4. We want to interview you. You need to talk to us about the gun because you're an expert. So let's come to your place. And they came to my place with cameras and wanted to see it.
And then Scotland Yard came afterwards.
No, not yet.
You haven't been yet asked about.
I have not been arrested.
3D printing and drones.
No. But let me finish on that one because it's funny. Then I read in the news a little bit further. The same day when that police came to that place, it's true that there was a 3D printer there, and it's true that it was printing something, and nobody knows what it was actually. But the same day, they captured like 15 people, put them in jail. They had maybe 200,000 or 300,000 pounds of whatever drugs and stolen goods and things. You did not see that in the article. The only thing you didn't see in the journal is 3D printing could be a gun, and they did not mention the whole rest of the weird things that these guys were doing. So much attracted by that 3D printing gun. And I've been traveling with my printers from country to country to give talks, to demonstrate, And at custom they were asking, what is this? And I said, 3D printer. Oh, can you print a gun? Be serious. Printing a bit like this would take an hour. Printing a gun, if even it would be possible, that would take 2 days. I mean, you jump in a plane and you would start your printer. So you don't even have a socket in the plane to plug the printer, and then you would spend how many time to, it makes no sense. Be serious 2 minutes. Sorry, I've got a question on my right here. Yeah.
After visiting you in August, I saw a two-time TV program concentrating on 3D printing for guns.
Yeah.
One was that, just to tell you the story, a guy was shot with a gun, and he had a tough time trying to figure out which gun that belonged to, because for some reason when you print the gun using this, the spiral on the bullet it's not the same as you use a metal thing, right?
Yeah, possibly.
And then so for a while they never know how to deal with it. But the thought was that if you shoot that gun twice, the gun will burst. That's how they caught the crook, because he damaged his hand when he shot it.
Sarah.
I just want to say, when you're talking about the feasibility of printing a gun, wasn't the whole the initial thing that brought together 3D printing of a gun was there was that guy in America who decided to make what you needed to print a gun in 3D and got the 3D print and then released it online for
Yes,
everyone to
that
see.
was the initial big thing, yeah.
But he did actually produce the gun.
Yes, but not with an affordable, cheap plastic 3D printer, with an expensive big machine printing in metal. Because the rule in the US is that, you know, they kind of say that they kind of regulate guns and track them. But in fact, their rules, if you read them carefully, say that the cannon and several parts are not actually tracked. The only part that is actually tracked is the one where you actually hit the bullet, which is making sense in a way. So these guys have not printed the whole gun. They have printed that part. And then they mounted on it some real guns parts that they really actually bought in stores, but they are not tracked. So that was the first thing. So back in November 1 year ago, the guy would be able to do it and shoot, and boom, it blows after just one shot. And then we had some news in December or January where he could shoot like 2, 3, 4, but then it blows. And then the new news in March was that he could empty a full, maybe 15 or 25 cartridge, and then after that, when you put the second one, then it blows. So it was about printing that particular central part of the gun with an expensive, and now, because that has been in the news, that new people try to do that with inexpensive machine costing 1,000 or 2,000, because that's a new, you know, just if you do some record, then somebody wants to beat you and do something more difficult and more, you know. So they will try, and you know what? At some point they will do it. And no, it is not a good reason to stop 3D printing at all. It is just for some thoughts about ethics, about rules, about regulation, about traceability, and there is nothing that will prevent 3D printing. I mean, that would be, it's like, you know, when there is some wind coming, some fool try to stop the wind, and some others try to build windmills. I'm more looking into trying to build windmills.
And not arguing anything about guns, yeah? But you mentioned glasses, eyeglasses.
Yes.
Could you make measure your eyes? Yeah, could you make them print the glasses, the lenses and the frame?
The frame, yes, we do that. We have them in the store.
Yeah,
Come at Selfridges, you can buy them.
The whole thing.
The lens is not yet. Not yet at our level, although I know that it is technically possible. I'm not quite sure if it will be anytime sustainable, makes sense, but technically yes, but not with anything affordable at the moment. And the frames, yes, for sure, we have 24 different models at the moment in Selfridges with our store. You can come and buy one, and they are optically compliant. So you buy a pair, you go to your optician, and you have your lenses mounted on them. That's for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so the live webcast is going to go too far from
Excellent.
time. Carl, if it wasn't to be known that, not impossible, sorry, but to know that somebody has an intention to print a gun with a 3D printer, would you know about it? Anyway, never mind about, because that's the whole point. Because not you, but this current surveillance and intelligence and possibility of stepping noticing everything that one does, which is what bothers us about. Wouldn't that be known anyhow? And that could form part of public security.
Yeah, I mean,
which
you'd
is a
be a bit of
positive
an idiot if you started tweeting about doing something illegal like building a gun, to be honest. But I mean, I just want to draw out what I saw to be a main implication of the kind of, when we're talking about whether it's social media or 3D printing, these disruptive innovations which are changing society in powerful ways, is not only what's happening today, but I mean, this has to be future casting. we have to look at, if we're building a regulatory regime to make the world safe in the 3D printing age, we have to think about what 3D printing will be able to do in 5 or 10 years' time, right? So like, dwelling purely on the inability or expensiveness of 3D printing to today manufacture a firearm or other kind of things, I think is wrong. I mean, that's not always going to be the case, right? Like social media, these are technologies which are galloping forward at almost unbelievable pace. Driven by almost unbelievable amounts of innovation and money. So yeah, I mean, that's why for me, and what I was kind of like trying to emphasise is that it's not the technology itself which is the important question here. It's the structures that you put on that technology, surround that technology with, to make sure that its overall contribution to society is a net positive, is beneficial. Because you're completely right about one thing, whether it's 3D printing or social media or lots of other innovations we haven't spoken about today, which we could have done, you cannot turn back the clock. These are things which are going to be adopted, they're going to be used, the question really is how do we come to terms with that as a society and as a world, really?
Okay. Well, on this note, only Australia has
Yeah,
a
I was
point.
just going to say that we've been making guns for generations now, and we haven't been using 3D printers, and it's very easy to make them on a lathe and a milling machine and in a workshop, and as every third world country knows. So 3D printing really is nice, but it's not going to be mass production as such. Yeah. So I don't see 3D printing
for sure.
Not for
Not forget.
for sure.
Yes, please. At first I thought it was science fiction. But now that I know it's not science fiction, the question is
it because of
why
that?
did it take so long to have this type of innovation?
To be honest, it's a very good one, because technically it's not that difficult. Not really, it is not. One of the clues for that is patent. So patent is a new disease, I like to call it. This technology, the one that we use in the affordable cheap 3D printers that we sell today for 1,000 something, was protected by a patent for years. And that patent gone public after like the 25 years as usual. And as soon as it has gone public, the price has dropped by tenfold. And the reason being that, in fact, it was a brilliant idea, but not very difficult to implement. So many people knew that it was possible, and they could do it in their own garage, but they could not sell it. It was forbidden by the patent. But you could do it for yourself. So you could prepare, you could work on it, and you could be good at it. As soon as the patent drops, go, you can sell. And so that's the reason it has been so quick between the end of the patent and today, where we have that MakerBot company, which you have probably heard about, doing that black machine that we sell. They sold last year for $10 million last year in revenue, not in benefit, in revenue, which is something, but not that big deal. Yeah, that company has been acquired by Stratasys for $600 million. Who buy a company for 60 years of revenue? Like, did it, you know? And this is just an example. You know? So patents is probably the one. And another one example I can give you is the printer that we use in our store to make those figurines I was mentioning, Mini U we call them. To make the Mini U's, we use a big printer that is for sale for something like 50,000. It's a big one. Printing in color, brilliant, quickly, it works. But if you look into the technology itself, it's basically a 2D printer, inkjet, where you just replace the ink by some dyed glue or glued ink, I don't know how you want to call it. And instead of printing on the paper, you print on a powder. So you have a layer of powder, very thin, 100 microns, a tenth of a millimeter, and a 2D printer, instead of spitting some ink on paper, it spits some glue on powder. Not a big deal. And when it's done, you have another layer of the same height on top, and you play again, and you have the whole lot going down by tenths of millimeter. Not a big deal. I mean, it's not some rocket science technology. It's not going to the moon. It's just like a 2D printer where you replace the paper by powder. Okay, there is some fine tuning. Probably the ink is not any ink, and the glue is not any glue, and the powder is probably some powder. But it doesn't make sense to sell that for 50,000 unless you have a patent protecting you. As soon as that patent will fall, stop recording, please. As soon as that patent will, no, because I'm a partner with them, so the price will drop by 2, by 3, by 4. I don't know. I mean, the technology itself doesn't. You can record now.
In foresight terms, do you see this happening like cell phone markets where it evolves to less than 10 players worldwide?
Oh, this is too much for me. I cannot go into that kind of a speculation. I don't know. We are beginning in something. We are today in 3D printing pretty much like where we were in computers in AT. If you remember AT, we had, well, I had my first computer, it was a ZX Sinclair. And at that time we had Sinclair, Commodore, Atari, Spectrum, blah blah blah. None of them survived the next 5 years. Just none of them. Apple has survived, but you know how. I mean, they have kind of died and then they have revived them. You know, not very much. And IBM had to sell their own computer things to Lenovo and things. So none of these guys on the market at that moment have really survived it. But new players have come in and they have succeeded. And I think we are almost there in terms of 3D printing. They are not all of them compliant together. Still, Ultimaker is using that 3 mil filament, and all others have agreed on a 1.75 mil. Well, I don't want to go too confused, but we are at the very beginning. It's like mushrooming. They have new company every month and some dying, and so we are at the beginning. It's too early to say where we are going.
Another question, isn't additive manufacturing a larger field than just
what was that?
Additive manufacturing. Additive.
Oh yeah, additive manufacturing in a whole, yeah? Yeah. Well, additive manufacturing and 3D printing is pretty much today merged into the same either. However, it's not really true, I agree. So additive manufacturing would be a bit more comprehensive than just 3D printing, but 3D printing is a bad name, so not really.
Okay, well, I suppose if we weren't to have an insight of 3D printing, and tomorrow by the same time we'll have another insight, we'll be quite sleepy by now. So that was my tactic, to have something right at the end to wake up and stimulate everybody. But one thing that is 3D printing probably started up is a movement around the makers movement. And the makers movement, we probably will find out, we don't have time now to speak about, also relates to makers and learning, and this idea of new type of learning, because you're making a new learning. And tomorrow probably, in the afternoon, we may go a little bit into that. You may not be here, but there are so many dimensions around the 3D printing of visual manufacturing and so on that are useful in relation to advice, because in relation to leveraging, in relation to how nations could succeed rather than fail. So thank you very much, Sylvain. And and Deputy Prime Minister, you have the last word.
I wanted just to appreciate the last presenter, but not only him, but of course the way we have been sharing our experiences You know, every time I come to this meeting, I go back a different person in terms of thinking and looking at issues. Now, somebody said today, my brother from Zimbabwe, that this is another talking shop, but talking shop that really educates you. It's not a talking shop like those that don't educate. We every time you get exposure, and it is important that specifically those who attend this meeting to know that you are not really losing, we are gaining. And go back home, there are quite a number of these ideas that we can use when we are doing our job, both public and in private sector. It's so important. So I want just to thank the members for the active day and the way we have interacted. Thank you very much.
Thank to you. So do you want to for
I
just wanted to thank you for your good comments on what I said, and I wanted to say that we want to the real printer really printing was how it works, and also you see those marvelous like 3D printing lamps and glasses and whatever
very good. And my ambassador will just pay my mini. Thank you very much.
There are smart breaks if you want. There's a long day, long interactions. If you want in the garden room, and then tomorrow morning.